so that left me alone 3 out of the 5 night shifts that I worked that week. My first 2 nights went as usual with no problems. It was slow and all the drive-thru customers' orders were small and simple. On the 3rd night, it started out slow as well, with only 5 to 10 customers coming every hour, ordering a small snack or a drink. Then around 2 a.m., there was a long break of nobody showing up for almost 45 minutes. I kept my headset on in case someone pulled into the drive-thru, but decided to start cleaning while I had extra time. There wasn't really anything else to do, so cleaning was my way of passing the time. I'm not really sure how long I was cleaning for, as I was never interrupted. But I passed by the front counter at one point and noticed bright headlights shining through the front window of the store. The car was parked right outside the doors. Our restaurant's dining room closed at 9 p.m. every night, and only kept the drive-thru open, so it was a little weird that someone was parked there. But of course, I didn't really think too much of it, as they could have just parked in the other direction on their iPhones, so I continued with my cleaning. A few minutes later, though, my headset beeped, signaling that a customer was in the drive-thru lane. I quickly made my way to the window and asked how I could help them. The man spoke softly, asking for a large soda. I told him to pull forward and began pouring his fountain drink. The guy pulled up really quickly, though, so I was still pouring the drink. But I could see in the corner of my eye that he was looking in the window at the restaurant. Some people did this, but I never understood why, because it makes it really awkward. But I finished up and handed him the drink. He gave me exact change, and I thanked him, telling him to have a good night as I stepped away and went back to cleaning. I wiped down a few counters and reorganized a small shelf. But as I passed by the window, I jumped back a little, as the man was still there, staring at me. Did you want something else, sir? He didn't respond for a moment, not even reacting to my question, before he finally said no and drove away. The guy must have been sitting there, looking in the window for a whole 5 minutes while I was cleaning, which was really creepy and weird, but I knew the doors to the restaurant were locked, so I still felt somewhat safe. Again, I kept my headset on and went over to the front counters to wipe them down. A few more minutes go by before there's a beep in the headset again, but when I got to the computer and asked what they wanted, nobody answered. I asked again, and still got no response, so I turned around and looked at the cameras behind me that showed live footage of the drive-thru line. Strangely, the car passed the ordering station and was stopped several feet behind the window I was standing at. I looked closer and could recognize the car as the man from just a few minutes ago. At this point, I was starting to get pretty nervous, so I backed away from the window and stood around the corner. The way I was positioned, I was out of sight from the window, but I could still see the footage from the camera. I couldn't tell what the guy in the car was doing, but I could see movement in the grainy video. A minute later, he pulls the car up quickly and starts banging on the window aggressively. I was startled, but after a few moments, he speeds his car out of the drive-thru lane and parks right in front of the front door. The driver door swings open and the man gets out, holding something in his hand as he quickly approaches the front door. I immediately grabbed the store phone and called 911 as the man aggressively shook the handles, trying to force the locked doors open. Thankfully, he gave up after a few tries and ran back to his car, driving away. The police made sure I was okay when they arrived, and I told them what had happened. From what I heard, they came back in the morning to speak with my manager and collect the camera footage so that they could get a license plate. I was never updated on the situation after that, though, so I'm not really sure if he was caught. I've always assumed the man was attempting a robbery, but there's no way to know for sure. Being alone that night made me an easy target, though, and a lot of horrible things could have happened, and there would have been no one there to help me.
Hello?
Have you met them yet?
Met who?
Betty's can get to you.
Rated PG-13.
Oh, the camera on the wall. Okay. Wait. Oh. Is that death?
If you love football, this is the best time of the year.
This is as big as it gets in this game.
Oh, what a shot! What a goal! What a player!
Look at
iconic. The stuff of absolute dreams.
We rented that night. They've taken safety measures to ensure no one or nothing breaks into their house. Yet still, the question remains:
I'm pretty sure they would know if there
who
was
or what
a kid
had
in
been
their
inside
house
their home, and just what in the world
that was
was
supposed to be
this?
there.
In this last video, two friends are playing with a doll, and according to them, does something pretty strange.
I only
The
worked
video
there for
starts
about
off
3
with both
weeks.
friends
The
playing
job
with a
was
doll.
fun.
Ain't no way that hit.
When I worked there, I knew a little bit of everything. It was often helping people. One day when I was working, he came through the drive-thru with coffee. When he got to the window and I handed it to him, he asked me for my number, and he seemed sort of creepy. I told the man no, but tried to be nice to him. He seemed a lot older than me. He was a big guy with a slight beard and brownish
do the
hair
thing
that
that
was
it usually
messy.
does. However,
The guy said
while
okay
recording
to
the
me and
figurine,
left.
they noticed that its eyes
Things
are
like
a
this
different
didn't
color.
happen often, but
For
would
some
occasionally.
reason, its
And
blue
normally it
eyes,
wasn't a big
initially
deal.
seen at the start of the clip,
But
are
later in
now
that day, the
completely
man
black.
came back.
They continue to
It was
record the
about 2
doll
hours
when
later.
this is captured.
Inside the restaurant this time. I had moved to working near the front counter and didn't even remember him at first because of how busy we had been. It wasn't as busy now that I was working, and the man came up to the counter and asked me if I remembered. At that point, I did. He started talking to me, asking me if I wanted to go out with him. I told him that I was working and I didn't want to. I then told him I didn't have time to talk, and I wasn't going to order anything, and I had to help the next person in line. He then put his hands up and said, "All right," and then started to walk away. It was the afternoon now, and we closed at 8 p.m., so I only had a few hours left. When we got back to work, I didn't see the man again during my shift. The last hour was very quiet, and as the sun set and it got dark out, we would rarely get very many customers. My coworker Anna went to sweep the floors of the restaurant, which is something that we usually did shortly before closing. I started to do some cleaning behind the counters, and I came back a few minutes later and said to me that there was a guy who seemed to be pacing and walking around the
The doll
parking
turns
lot.
by itself after being
There
moved
were no other
around.
cars there other than
According to
ours,
them,
and she
it
mentioned how it
doesn't
seemed a
like
little
being
weird
placed
because
in
it
a
kept
certain
looking
spot.
over.
It's for this reason
Came
that
up
it turns
behind
away
the
on its
counter and
own.
looked out the window.
Now the friends have tried explaining this, but it seems that nothing plausible comes to mind. They have no clue as to how the doll moved on its
We both
own.
figured that he knew we were closed.
Unfortunately, with no further info on this video, it seems that this incident will remain a
I
mystery.
decided to call my dad. Luckily,
But
we
aside
lived
from this
only a few
encounter,
miles
the
away, so it wasn't too far of a drive.
appearance is pretty creepy.
My dad said he would be there
Paranormal or
soon.
not, this doll
When he
has
arrived,
to be the
he
stuff of
picked me up
nightmares.
right outside the door so I didn't have to talk to the man. He drove Anna and I to our cars and drove the other into the parking lot. We didn't have to deal with the guy who was extremely creepy. When we all arrived, we saw the guy just standing in the middle of the parking lot
With
watching
US
us.
Cellular Prepaid, getting a great
Didn't
deal
work at
doesn't mean
Dunkin'
sacrificing a great experience.
Never worked
Other
another
providers have
closing
price
shift
hikes
until we saw the man
but with
again.
US Cellular, there are no
But I do
hidden
wonder
fees.
what would
And
have
now you
happened
can
if
get a
I walked to
Samsung
my car
Galaxy
by myself
A16
that
5G for free. US Cellular, built for us.
This happened about 3 weeks ago. It was roughly about 3:30 in the morning, and I was watching some YouTube videos. I saw my dog's ears perk up, and he walked to the back door. I figured he needed to use the restroom, so I went to let him out. When I made it over to the door, I unlocked it, and I was about to open the door when something then told me to click the light on first. When I did so, I then saw something quickly flash behind the side of my house. I felt uneasy, but I opened the door and let the dog out. He immediately bolted to the side that I saw the flash, and then disappeared into the dark. I then grabbed my dad's 12-gauge shotgun that we keep hidden by the back door for emergencies. I grabbed my spotlight and looked around, but I couldn't really see from the porch. I closed the door and I stepped off the porch, calling my dog's name. Eventually he came running back to me, and I took him back into the house. But when I reached the door, I saw that it was cracked open. This frightened me, mostly because I was alone for the weekend, and I know I closed the door. As I approached the back door, gun in hand, I saw a light moving around in my house. I put my dog on his chain, and then slowly moved into the house. When I got into the room where the light was coming from, which was my sister's room, I slowly and quietly nudged the door open with my barrel, and when I turned on the light, I saw a large man wielding one of my knives from my bedroom. I told the man to drop the knife and get the fuck out of my house before I shoot him. He promptly dropped my knife, and he then proceeded to jump out of my sister's window like this was some kind of action movie or something. I fired 3 shots into the air as he ran away. I don't know who this man was or what he had planned, but whoever he was, if he happens to return the next time, there will not be a warning.
Why is it? Look at that. Why y'all here when I'm tweaking, bro?
This happened around 8 years ago. My then husband and I had just found out we were expecting our son. Now, at the time, we were living with my parents.
So can you hear me?
But since we were expecting, we decided that we should try and find our own place. Well, we ended up finding a single wide trailer for rent. It was in a decent-looking trailer park, and it wasn't really that fancy at all. But it was our own place, and we were really excited about it. Well, turns out, the trailer right beside us was our landlord. And we found out when we went to pick up our keys and pay for our deposit. And he seemed very nice. About a week after moving in, I had a doctor's appointment. So my husband and I were walking out of the house to get into the car. And we then heard a door slam. And we noticed that our landlord was running towards us.
I didn't know
We
if
asked
you
if
can hear me or
anything was
not.
wrong, but he said no. But that he wanted to ask how we were doing and settling in. We told him everything was great, and that we're doing really fine. And he goes on to ask where we were going, and just how long we would be gone. Basically, being kinda nosy. That made me fall off. Anyways, on the way to the appointment, I started getting this dreadful feeling. Later on after the appointment, when we finally got home, we noticed that the door to our trailer was unlocked, which is very strange. Now, I'm very OCD when it comes to locking my doors and windows and the like. And when I then told my husband I was absolutely positive that I locked the door, he just shrugged it off, saying it must be pregnancy brain. So I just let it go. My husband worked the night shift, so from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., pretty much I'm home alone.
But I do know
I was
like
laying on my couch when I then heard someone beating on my back door.
a second delay.
I got up and checked it out.
2 to 5 second
Sure
delay.
enough, it's my landlord. I also want to add that this was all around 3 a.m. I opened the door and I asked if everything was okay, to which he replied with, "Yeah, I just wanted to tell you if you need anything during the night while your husband's at work, just let me know." I just thanked him and said okay, and then went to shut the door. As I did so, however, he just
What
kept
kind of homemade
standing
pizza did
there,
y'all make?
smiling widely, and just kind of giving me the creeps. I shut and locked the door. After that encounter with the landlord, I decided to call my husband and tell him about the landlord, and how he's really giving me a lot of bizarre and creepy vibes. He just told me to keep the doors locked, and don't answer the door if he knocks again. I said okay, and finally fell asleep. Well, it's now about 2 nights later. I was home alone again around 2 a.m. when our dog started barking absolutely crazy and just going insane, which is not like him at all. I looked out the window to check what was going on that would cause my dog to react that way, and I see none other than the landlord standing in the backyard right behind our house.
Pepperoni.
I totally started
I
panicking.
know that look. That sound.
I make sure the house is locked up, and I stay awake all night long until my husband got home the next day. My husband confronted the landlord, which of course this made him very upset. But for about a month, we didn't have another problem out of it. Fast forward to around Christmas time. My husband had to go out of town for work, so I was going to be home alone for 2 nights. The second day I was home alone, I decided to go to my parents' house and spend the day there. So when I left the house, I made sure to check all of my doors and windows 3 times, just to make sure they were locked this time. Around 10 p.m., I got home, and to my surprise, my door was fully unlocked. I slowly walked in the house, and there was no sign of anything unusual. That is, until I went to the bedroom. Once I got in, I saw what looked like someone had went through our closet and my dresser. Not my husband's, but mine. I freaked out, but instead of calling the cops, I drove back to my parents and stayed there for the rest of the night. The next day, when my husband returned home from work, he confronted the landlord, asking if he went into our home. He totally denied anything of the sort, and he started acting really offended over the whole thing. We wanted to move, but we didn't really have the extra money to do that. But we did get an idea to try and figure out what the hell exactly was happening when we weren't home. And that idea, you ask? Hidden cameras. We secretly installed cameras in our trailer, and then we went and stayed at a friend's house for the night. Well, the next day when we returned home, we checked the cameras, and I still can't believe it to this day. But there was our landlord going into our home and trying on my clothes. Not just my clothes though, but also my underwear and bras as well. He then masturbated to my pictures. I was completely fucking horrified by this. We really should have taken legal action, but we didn't. We just got the hell out of there and officially moved out the next day. We didn't have a lease or anything. It was just a month-to-month kind of rental, so we got really lucky with that. We stayed with our friends until we could get another place. It's been about 8 years since this happened. Me and my husband split up.
Now taxes is getting up to $4,000 instantly.
This story has always been at the back of my mind. I'm 23 now. Let me explain the house that we lived in. It was an upstairs downstairs. In the upstairs, there was one bedroom, long hallway to the bathroom, where I was. So I started a new job. I was 20 at the time. I was a trainee at a hairdresser's. I spent the whole day on my feet, making coffees, tea, and brushing up the hair on the floor. It doesn't seem like hard work, but the hairdressers were very busy because a bride was in with their bridesmaids trying out different hairstyles, so I had to stay a bit longer. I started at 9 and finished at 5. So after my shift, all I could think about was a nice warm bath. My legs were killing me. I lived with my boyfriend, who was out of town doing some jobs for his dad to help pay the rent. It was a fairly nice house. It belonged to his brother, who allowed us to move in. As soon as I got home, relaxed for a bit and went upstairs. Ran in the bath, locked the door, and got in it. So at this point, I was drifting away in a very relaxing hot bath, but then I heard a noise on the stairs, and it startled me. I convinced myself I was being paranoid because I don't like being home alone. But then I heard it again. It was like someone was slowly sneaking up the stairs. I still lay in the bath, making sure the water didn't splash. While I was doing this, I listened, and I wasn't being paranoid. Someone was sneaking up the stairs, very slowly, step by step. I'm laying in the bath, terrified with tears running down my face. The noise had moved from the stairs to the hallway, and it was getting closer. Closer until it stopped outside my bathroom door. I froze, no movement, and I even held my breath. I don't know how long this happened, but it felt like hours. I could hear breathing against the door, a light faint tap on the door. I stayed quiet and prayed that they didn't bust the door down. It must have lasted a few minutes, but it felt like forever. My fear was confirmed. Very loud feet were making their way back down the stairs, and my back door slammed open. I jumped out the bath, ran down the hall, and grabbed the phone, which we had in our bedroom, straight back to the bathroom and locked the door. I called the police. My skin was wrinkled from the water. I was shaking, crying on the phone to the operator. She told me to stay in the bathroom with the door locked until 2 police officers would come, and she would tell me when they were there. Dripping wet, with my back pressed against the bathroom door, shivering, I waited. We stayed on the phone until the police came, and they checked the back and front door. The back door was wide open. I stayed in the bathroom until a police officer shouted up that it was safe to come out. He shouted up, and I ran down the stairs like my life depended on it. The woman officer calmed me down while I told her what had happened. She asked me, could it have been my boyfriend or anyone I knew? The answer was no. His brother moved away, My family didn't live near me anymore, and my boyfriend was out of town. He was at his dad's helping with the job. Nothing was stolen. Everything was in place except the back door was hanging wide open. They took my statement and asked me if there was anywhere that I could go, and honestly the answer was no. I was told to get a security system like an alarm. The police did a great job. I felt much better that they had checked the house, around the neighborhood, and even warned the neighbors. I couldn't get a hold of my boyfriend until we came home. I told him what happened, and he was shocked. And then the neighbor had someone try to break in their house later during the night. Now I'm 23 and I no longer live in that house, but still with my boyfriend. We have a huge dog, a German Shepherd, who's a guard dog. But I still feel taking back home alone. I have a nightlight which goes off when someone enters our garden, and a security system. As for the person who did it, they were never caught.
I joined the gym for the first time 3 months ago. Now, a gym is really the last place you'd expect something scary to happen. But last week, I had the most horrific experience of my life. I wear one of those wireless headphones when I go to the gym because the wired ones always get in the way and they're just annoying. Sometimes I leave my phone on a workout machine when I walk to the water fountain. And when the phone gets too far away from the headphones start getting all staticky before disconnecting. I only knew because it happened a couple of times before when I walked away too far from my phone in the gym. Well, one late night last week, I was one of the last people still in the gym. I was on one of the seated machines. While I was pushing towards my final reps, the music in my headphones started to get staticky. Until my headset said, disconnected from phone. I stopped my set and reached over to the phone compartment on top of the machine, and I was filled with worry when I couldn't feel my phone. It wasn't there. I looked around the gym desperately, thinking that someone might have taken it. I only saw 2 other people in the whole gym, excluding the guy sitting at the front desk. One guy was really fat and sweaty, and the other guy was sitting on one of the machines looking down on his phone. Which one of these could have taken my phone? Could have been either of them. I had to approach the guy sitting on his phone as much as I didn't want to. He had his earbuds on, so when I approached him, he looked at me with a confused look on his face, as if he didn't want to talk to me. He took the earbud out and looked at me, and I firmly asked him, did you take my phone? He looked at me in silence for a couple of seconds and then said,
I'm actually
no.
watching.
There was an obvious attitude. I asked him if he saw anyone else walking by recently, and he just shook his head.
You 2 guys
I said
react
thanks and
like
walked
those
away.
videos.
When deep down I wanted to tell him to quit being a dick. I went to the front desk and asked the worker to check the video cameras and see once and for all who actually took my phone. As the guy working in the front clicked around on his computer, the rude guy I spoke to walked past me and out the exit. The worker then turned the computer screen so that I could see it and clicked play on a video, which showed the guy who just left 15 seconds ago taking my phone. I thanked the employee and ran to catch the guy who just left. But by the time I got outside, the guy was nowhere to be found. The scary thing that sunk in right away was the fact that I recently disabled my passcode blocks on my phone, meaning he had access to all my apps, all my texts, pictures, emails, all of my data. Basically, I went back inside and asked the employee to track that man's membership info. But when he checked the cameras, that guy didn't even check in. He simply walked past the counter unnoticed. So there were no records of this guy even being a member of the gym. The footage showed that he suspiciously walked around between the machines, looking around, a lot like a nervous person.
We need scary videos, so if you've seen one or you have one, send it our way and you can stop by.
I asked the employee to report that to the police. He said he'd show it to his boss tomorrow. The next day, I called my best friend Tom so I could tell him why I wasn't answering his texts for a while, and to also see if he could tell all my other friends what had happened. He started to freak out on the phone, begging me to tell him I was kidding about losing my phone. He told me that someone had been sending him texts and came to his house. I didn't understand, so he said he'd be over to show me. 10 minutes later, Tom got to my house and showed me a long conversation between him and someone using my phone, pretending to be me. It started out with the person on my phone saying, "Can I stay at your place tonight?" I got into a huge fight with my parents. Tom said, "Yeah, let me know when you can come over." Then the guy who was using my phone said, "Can you just leave the back door open?" I'm going to be super late and I don't want to wake you. The conversation went on a little while longer before Tom finally agreed to just leave the back door unlocked. Tom went back to sleep under the impression that it was actually me who would be coming through the back door. When we finished reading the conversation, Tom looked at me and said, "We need to check the cameras." We rushed to his house together and watched the footage captured on the cameras throughout his house. I was disturbed, but also not surprised to see that the man from the gym who took my phone walked in through the back door of Tom's house. He scavenged the place, grabbing expensive household objects and throwing them into his pocket. He moved from the den to the kitchen and eventually upstairs. I saw the fear in Tom's face when he watched the man on the camera on the upstairs hallway, opening his bedroom door, stepping in for about 20 seconds and then come back out, leaving the door open. The man was in the house for about 10 minutes before sneaking back out the back door. It looked like he took a lot of valuables. Tom and I sent their video footage to the police. And when I went back to the gym, the manager told me that she was sending in their footage as well. 3 months later, not a word from the police. So whoever stole my phone and snuck into Tom's house, I'm free.
3 hours long.
And the roommate hurries downstairs to try and help.
There was once a Chuck E. Cheese in my town. It was always fun to pass by and see the kids, the parents, and the parties. But one day it was
it's
closed,
like 3 hours long.
never to be reopened, all because of me.
I'm
Me
trying
and my
to find
best
something
friend
that
Ralph
is
loved Chuck
somebody.
E. Cheese with all of our hearts.
You or
Every
whoever
Wednesday, our parents would generously give us $10 of
decided to
tokens
join my live
so we could go play by
I got
ourselves
back on
after
the game.
school. We were in 6th grade now. Schoolmates would make fun of us for our obsession, but we didn't care. We were grateful to get our tokens each week. Today was different though. We had hatched a genius plan. I had told my mom I was sleeping at Ralph's, and Ralph had told his mom he was sleeping over at my house. We were on a mission to stay overnight at Chuck E. Cheese. We chose the ball pit as our hiding spot. So when it was about 5 minutes to closing, we each made sure no one was looking, and then ducked our heads beneath the multicolored balls. The announcement that they were closing came. Then the lights turned off one by one. We breathed as quietly as possible and tried to stifle our giggles about how we were actually getting away with this. The employees cleaned up for what seemed like an eternity, but after 20 minutes had gone by since we had heard any voices or the door close, we erupted out of the ball pit with such force and excitement that the balls flew over the net and across the room. Luke! We did it! Ralph screamed in absolute joy. All of the lights were off except for the stage, where we could clearly see Munch's make-believe band looking excited as ever. We walked around the room filled with dark screens, wondering what to do next. Everything seemed normal at first, until it wasn't. I had been staring at Helen up on the stage for just a moment when I turned around and Ralph was nowhere to be found. "Ralph!" I called out. No answer. He must have gone to the bathroom, I thought to myself. I waited 5 long minutes. The more I stared at Chucky, the more I saw his grin widen. I have to be imagining this, I thought. My heart began racing. "Ralph!" I called out as I walked backwards toward the bathroom. Suddenly, not wanting to take my eyes off Chucky, to my horror, there was no answer. I finally let my eyes slip away from Chuck. As I ran into the boys' room hoping to see Ralph, I looked under each stall. I began hyperventilating, and I ran back into the dimly lit room. My heart fell to the floor as I noticed something missing. All of the animatronics were up there, except Chucky. "Ralph!" I screamed out at the top of my lungs now, absolutely terrified. Suddenly, I heard a soft cry coming out of the ball pit. There was Ralph's hand. desperately reaching out of the pit as if he was drowning. But before I could reach him, he was pulled down underneath completely, where he shrieked like I've never heard anyone shriek before. Ralph! I yelled, ready to jump in, but it was too late. Slowly, a substance began leaking from the pit and overflowing all over the walls. It was blood. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw Chuck. He was smiling by the soda fountain, a huge knife in his hands. He raised his hand up and waved at me. You having fun, Luke? He said with a huge laugh. With my adrenaline taking hold of me, I sprinted for the door, knowing it was locked and I knew I needed something to break the glass. Come on, I just want to play. I heard Chuck's voice say as he traveled closer. Thankfully, I saw a chair that had been placed near the door, left by a night shift employee. I grabbed it and I hit the glass as hard as possible. It cracked, but it didn't break, only causing an alarm to go off. Ah! I screamed out of frustration. I hit it 2 more times before it broke. Without hesitation, I leaped out the hole, cutting my arms and legs as I did. I was halfway through the parking lot before I looked back. Chuck stood there looking through the window and waved one last farewell with the hand, but not his hand. Ralph.
Wow, guys, that was truly horrific. If you guys made it through that story, comment down below and let us know how many stories you can make it through. This next one is even worse than the last, so try not to have a panic attack.
Witchcraft in one of those.
I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal due by 10. How am I already underwater?
I'm in the same boat.
I'm in an actual boat.
I thought Grammarly just fixed grammar. They make boats now?
It's more of a metaphorical boat. Because I've been using Grammarly's AI for years to keep me high and dry. Try it. Grammarly can look through your writing to make it easier to understand. See? Shorter.
Whoa.
Clearer.
Cool.
And better. Now people will get what you're trying to say and you won't be flooded with confused emails.
Can you do mine?
No problem. Your writing's good, but your word choices could be better.
Wow.
Now your writing is as confident as you are.
If that's even possible. New email.
Oh, well, what about our proposal?
Let me take a look. Woof. You'll be in deep water if you show this to the CEO. Grammarly can point out what's missing. Right there. The CEO will want to see a deadline. And here you should connect the projections back to company strategy.
Yeah, how could I do that? Mia, can you do a deep dive?
On it. 10% higher revenue by next year.
I'm sending it in.
The CEO loves it. Budget and headcounts are approved.
Let's get everyone on board. I meant figuratively. Download Grammarly for free.
That's crazy. Wow.
Once Human is easily one of the best open world survival games of 2024, and it's loaded with your favorite survival game systems like crafting and upgrading epic gear, exploring the ruins of a civilization under threat, and my favorite part, the boss fights. Tons of massive, terrifying boss fights. Leading you through this massive world is an engaging main story quest. And all of this from a game that is free on Steam right now. Welcome to the most complete Once Human beginner guide on the internet. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know to maximize your time in Once Human. And be sure to use my code OnceHumanLG to redeem free in-game rewards. Shout out to the Once Human team for giving me early access to the game so I can make the best beginner guide possible. Now let's dive in. Now, the first thing that we should go over is progression in this game. What is motivating you? What is driving you forward? And that's going to be the main story quest, which can be found in here. You press L on PC or just go to tasks in your menu system, and you're going to see the quests that you have available to you here. Now, these quests can be found on the map by looking for the gold markers. The side quests are going to be blue markers, and it tells you what level you should be about, you know, give or take, when trying to complete these quests. And here it's showing me these quests are red because I am quite a bit low for these quests. My character's only level 38 or so right now, whereas the green quests I am amply leveled for. Those are green. That's what you're going to be looking for on the map. So at the very beginning of the game, if we scroll out, right, and here's the map of the world. It's massive, by the way. I've got loads of hours in just this small section down here. I haven't even made it into these areas on this playthrough yet. So our journey is going to start here at the Deadsville camp. So that is this icon right here, this blue water drop icon. That is going to be a camp. That's a base of operations. So this is the low level area, and the game has a very consistent progression route, right? So basically you're going to start in this area. You're going to go out and explore all of these icons, get all the loot, the rewards, make sure to grab all of the rift anchors. You're going to have to collect a certain number of these before you can continue. You don't have to grab all of them. If you miss one, that's okay, but it won't let you continue until you've grabbed enough of these rift anchors. So make sure you grab them whenever you're nearby. If you forget to do that, the main story quest will tell you, hey, you can't continue until you grab enough of these rift anchors. So to grab those, you just walk up to them and interact with them, and it's going to give you a bit of rewards. And then after you have explored enough of the area, collected enough of the loot and the rewards, eventually the main story quest will send you to the monolith of that area, which is going to be this icon right here, monolith. It's got a gold square with a monolith in front of it, and that's where you finish that region. So it starts here at the camp, which is going to be the hub of the main quest for the area, and then eventually it sends you to the monolith, and that's when you're going to fight the big bad boss for that area. And it's going to be a really fun and engaging boss fight. So whenever you head to a monolith, make sure you take lots of heals, lots and lots of ammunition. Make sure you upgrade your gear, upgrade your weapons. Make sure you are ready before you head into that monolith, because these fights are big.
Is that a brand? Yes. Okay.
Chuck E. Cheese pizza.
No.
It holds a nostalgic place in many of our hearts. It used to do the same for me. But what if I told you I had an experience with the pizza that was so disgusting and traumatic, it would make you never want a slice again. I went on my cousin's birthday. She was turning 8, so she was bright-eyed and excited. Meanwhile, I wasn't looking forward to the screaming kids and the stinky feet smell. But at least I got free pizza out of it. I sat down with my mom as we waited for the server to bring the pie to us. It was a special new type of pizza I'd never heard of. It had been added to the menu just today, I guess. It was called the Lori Special. They told us that it was a limited time special, and it had extra cheese, sauce, and delicious mystery toppings. At the time, the element of mystery was exciting, and we had our mouths watering. I hope it's extra sausage, I said to my mom excitedly. Come on, bacon would be better, she said playfully. After about 20 minutes, the first strange thing happened. Instead of a regular employee coming to give us the pizza, Chucky came out. All the kids ran up to him excitedly, expecting to be greeted with a dance or a ticket splash. Instead, he ignored them and silently, without a word, plopped the pizza in front of us. My mother kindly said thank you to him to break the awkward silence, but he still remained silent, staring at us with his big eyes until he abruptly ran back to the kitchen. We were puzzled, but hungry enough to ignore the weird encounter and the strange smell coming from the pizza, which was covered in pepperoni, sausage, bacon, and one last meat I couldn't identify. I picked up a piece and hesitantly took a bite. I instantly felt like vomiting. The sauce tasted like pennies and the cheese tasted like it was expired. But worst of all, I had bitten into a hard chunk of the mystery meat. I spat the meat chunks out onto my plate, only to be mortified by what I saw. A human fingertip. My mother screamed at the top of her lungs, "I'm calling the police!" The whole restaurant erupted in a confused panic. The manager came out confused and distraught and helped my mom dial the police. It was all a blur. All I could think about was the Chucky and how he stared at us as I sunk my teeth into the flesh. The cops said a girl named Lori had gone missing about a week ago. and it all came back to me. The Lori special. None of this was supposed to be going on. Till this day, every time I hear the name Chuck E. Cheese, I vomit.
So here are the events that have transpired in the past 2 hours or so, and a little backstory as to why this is freaking me out so much. My partner and I have recently moved back into my childhood home with my parents, while our own house is being built to save some cash and not have to move instantly from our rental when it's complete. My parents own 3 Australian native birds, and earlier tonight I was updating my Snapchat story to show my friends, as many of them always ask what the birds' names are and what they look like. I took 3 Snapchat videos, one after the other, and just put them on my story without worrying about retakes or what I look like, so please forgive me for the uploads. Anyways, within about 15 minutes of uploading, I received an SMS message from one of my good, but not great friends that said, "Bearded Beast, those birds are mad. By the way, the fuck was that in your window behind you in the last one?" I had no idea what he was going on about, so I went and watched my own Snapchat stories a couple of times. On the 3rd or 4th watch, I saw what he was talking about, and my stomach sank. I almost started to have a panic attack, and I'm still pretty shaken up. I immediately saved my story videos and put them onto my computer to see them larger. In the last Snapchat video I sent, it kind of looks like someone is at the door, looking in, with their hands cupped against the door. It's hard to tell because Snapchat videos are very poor quality, and the door is only in frame for probably 1 second. Whatever is in the 3rd Snapchat video, however, is definitely not in the first video when the door is in full view. I was the only person home at the time, and that particular door leads to the backyard, which is only accessible via a single locked gate. Here are the 3 videos I saved from my story.
So the first one of my parents' little birds is this little guy. It is little Leo. He's a cockatiel. The second little bird of my parents is a rainbow lorikeet. His name is Oliver. And there he is. And here I am with my good little mate.
You remember the first time it sounded happy?
Puffin.
To add some backstory as to why this has me freaking out so much. To do that, I have to quickly talk about my childhood teenage years up until I moved out with my partner at age 18. From about age 8 until age 10, I had episodes of sleep paralysis, 1 or 2 times a month, where it felt like a weight was sitting on my chest, and I couldn't breathe for about 40 seconds at a time. This led to insomnia and anxiety about bedtime, as I dreaded feeling helpless. I ended up seeing a child psychologist, and whether that was or was not the reason, the episodes largely went away, only once or twice a year until age 13. At age 12 or 13, for seemingly no reason at all, I started to get chronic episodes almost every night that lasted minutes to tens of minutes at a time. During these episodes, I could breathe, but couldn't move. The worst thing about these episodes, however, is that I felt like something was in the room with me and meant me no harm. Common for people who experience sleep paralysis. At roughly age 14, things really took a turn, and I started to hear and see things during maybe 1 in 10 of my episodes. Also pretty common for people who experience sleep paralysis. The things I heard were never too crazy and over the top, and were usually just thuds and creaks. However, when it came to seeing things, there was always one reoccurring thing. A faceless person looking into my bedroom window with their hands cupped to the glass.
Yeah, we saw this.
For the course of a 1 to 10 minute episode, this person would just stand there and look at me. Whenever the episode ended, the person would just be gone. Over the course of 4 years, this occurred quite regularly, but it always really made me feel totally helpless and terrified. I never got used to it. When I moved out at age 18, I never had another episode where I saw anything. I'm 26 years old now, and I very, very occasionally, once a year, have small, less than 30-second episodes, but only those in which I feel heavy-chested. To cut a very long story short, whatever is there in my Snapchat video looks almost 100% what I used to see as a teenager during my sleep paralysis episodes, and I have been a nervous wreck all night over it. To me, it kind of looks like a face to the glass and two hands on either side. It has scared the Christ out of me. What do you guys think? I'll try to answer as many questions as I can and respond to everyone that I can. Thanks a lot, guys.
So is this footage real? Is it all just an elaborate hoax?
What happens when real patients move curing hepatitis C from their to-do list to their today list?
I was able.
I matched with this one guy named Steve on Tinder. I wasn't looking for anything serious or a hookup or anything of that nature. Maybe friends, I guess. I don't know, I was just bored. That was really it. I thought he seemed cool because we had similar interests in music, style, clothes, and etc. I started talking to him, and only after a few hours, he got my Snapchat and started messaging me there. He started asking if I wanted to hang out later that night. I didn't reply for maybe 30 minutes or so, and that's when he started sending me multiple messages at once, without a response from me first. He sent me a question mark, and then 15 minutes later, he sent another message that said hello with a question mark. I don't like when people do that, and it gives kind of a red flag to me, especially when it's someone you have never met before online. I then started ignoring him altogether because it made me a little uncomfortable. In my experience, when a guy does that and it's someone that you've never met, they're usually very needy and sometimes controlling. So I steered myself away and didn't think much of it. I was out on a walk with my dog at a nearby park that I usually take him to a few times a week. I live in an apartment, so I like to make sure he really gets the exercise he deserves. We took a short break by this bench where I sat down for a few minutes, just enjoying the view, you know, and relaxing out in the nice spring weather for a moment, appreciating nature. Maybe after 10 minutes of sitting there, a random guy starts running my way. Emily, hey, is that you? It's me, Steve. I was just wondering what you were up to. Nice to meet you. What a coincidence. We just ran into each other, he said. Yeah, I said with a concerned look on my face. I started panicking because I knew something was wrong. This didn't feel like a coincidence. It didn't take long before I realized that he wasn't even the guy in the pictures. He had been catfishing me. That immediately sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew I was in for trouble. And then I remembered I had my Snapchat location turned on to all my friends. I forgot that I turned it on months ago to test something, and I forgot to turn it back off, apparently. This man was literally stalking me. He slowly started to harass me more and more, as he knew I was getting more frustrated and disinterested in him and what he was asking me by the second. At first it was by asking if I still wanted to hang out. I ended up telling him to leave me alone and that he was scaring me. It didn't take long before he started yelling at me. I was honestly shook, and at this point I was in fight or flight mode. My dog started barking at him in order of an attempt to protect me. He backed up just a bit, but continued harassing me with his words. He began saying some very disgusting things that I don't care to even share right now. Just know they were really inappropriate and horrible things that you should never say to someone. Thankfully, some old man who was jogging by recognized I was being harassed and he scared him off. I'm so thankful for that man, because I don't know what else would have happened had someone not stepped in and intervened. The guy took off and I've never heard from him since, and I obviously blocked him on everything. I'm still on edge, and sometimes I worry I will run into him when I'm alone or something. Please just be careful who you talk to on the internet. This could happen anywhere, at any time.
Journalism degrees lead to jobs both in typical journalism industries, but also in other fields, including strategic communications, advertising, politics, and with sports teams.
The fact that I have so many options to go from is journalism and mass communication. It's not just strictly journalism, so there's so many things I can do. I can also do marketing. I've gotten marketing internships. My internship right now is social media and marketing.
Right now, I'm going to be in Atlanta working for a nonprofit.
After I graduate here in May, I'll be an intern at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis.
I'm a senior reporter. I work on investigations at the Chicago Tribune.
You know, when you read a newspaper and you see like a bar chart on the New York Times' website or a map on the U.S. states and story, I am responsible for making that graphics like that for my publication.
I work with our coaches and our student athletes, and I talk about what they want to accomplish from their social media, both personally and our sports-specific accounts.
People are always looking for students who can write, who can clearly communicate, who have good critical thinking skills, the ability to talk to people, which you do a lot as a journalism student. So these are all hard skills and soft skills that translate to several fields.
You know, I can do stuff on cameras, I can do graphic design, I can do video editing or photo editing.
I just want to get really good at what I do. I don't really care where I work necessarily, as much as I can say that the work that I produced as a journalist has led to some sort of tangible change.
I've been able to work on projects that have had real impact in the world. And so obviously, that's the reason you do investigative journalism.
Journalism and media jobs and industries are always going to be changing, which is exciting but can be scary. But what I would say that I see is that the opportunities to tell stories, make media, create, report, serve your community are vast.
I'm told he's America's favorite conservative uncle. What lies deep beneath the surface? Michael Knowles joins us. I'm James Polis. Welcome to Zero Hour. Yes, Michael Knowles. He is the host of the Daily Wire's The Michael Knowles Show, and he joins us today from his Advent cave. Michael, 'tis the season.
Tis the season. It's not the Christmas season. It's when my producers decked the halls of my studio without my permission or knowledge. I initially reacted very negatively, but it looked so good and cozy and lovely. I said, look, as long as it is an Advent tree and an Advent wreath and an Advent little cozy little Michael Knowles figurine here, I am all for it. It's a great season. Then we can move into Christmas decorations in about 20 days.
Well, you are thoroughly decked out. I sort of think of you, and this is not an insult, as the Ryan Seacrest of the right. I hope the empire continues to expand for our long lives. You've got your cigars there. We've as a country, I think we can agree that we spend a lot of time in the psychological environment created by the wine ant archetype, and you seem to be offering the cigar uncle archetype, which really I think is working for you. And do you think it's going to be working for America?
James, first of all, could I please hire you to write all my log lines and PR pitches? The Ryan Seacrest of the right is maybe the highest compliment I've ever been paid, and I am the cigar uncle. We launched Mayflower Cigars about a year ago, and we had an ambitious plan for how many cigars we'd stock, and we sold out instantly, which is a great problem to have and everything, except that for a third of last year, I did not have any stock, basically, of any product to sell. So the stock is back in, the stockings can be stuffed, and whenever I opine on any other matter, I have to preface it. I say, look, I talk to people who have very fancy degrees, who are more intelligent than I. I am but a humble and simple cigar salesman, but I'll do my best.
Well, you're being a little too modest. You're not all lifestyle. I know that you care about the real issues, like what's happening to America under the rule of technology and some other stuff. But I do see, I see this trend, and it's not just happening among the tech bros, but it's spreading to other areas, at least online, if what I'm hearing is true. That nicotine is back. That guys are really stepping up to the nicotine plate and saying, don't drink beer, don't smoke weed. What you want is you want to lock in. You want high performance stimulants, caffeine, nicotine. Do you embrace this? Do you think that this is a generational shift?
It is a generational shift, and it's a political divide without question. Tucker put it very well when he pointed out that the libs want you smoking pot so that you're fat and lazy and stupid, But we on the right, we prefer to be focused. A friend of mine who got a little into those 6 millilit pillies, pouches of sin, he said that they make him a better husband and father. But I have to urge some caution here, because the great theologian Mike Foley had a good essay in First Things some years ago on the very uses of nicotine, specifically of tobacco, that the philosopher is more inclined to smoke the pipe. The pipe it refers to the intellect, the logical part of the soul, and the little pouches and cigarettes, and that really appeals to the appetitive part of the soul. It can be addictive, it can be really habit-forming, but cigars, which is my preferred form of tobacco, that appeals to the thumotic part of the soul, the spirited part of the soul. You think of Churchill, it's more about what you puff out than what you take in. And so I am a supporter, tobacco obviously helped to build our country. It was discovered from the standpoint of the West by Christopher Columbus when he met those lovely Taino Indians way back in 1492. So I'm all about it, but as with anything, it has to be done in moderation. But when done in moderation, never more than one cigar at a time, as Mark Twain said, when done in moderation, it can be really terrific. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, but it won't stop me from telling it, of St. Pius X. He's a saint. When he was Pope, he was sitting there in his papal office, and some wayward cardinal came in. Pope Pius X offered him a cigar. The cardinal said, no, Holy Father, I do not have that vice. And Saint Pius X leaned into him, and he said, cigar smoking is not a vice. You have enough vices already, so I wouldn't offer you one if it were.
As the late, great Christopher Hitchens liked to say, martinis are like breasts. One is not enough, and 3 is too many.
A great point. One of the few good points that Christopher Hitchens ever made.
Yes, one of his best. So, it's interesting because we have this nicotine trend, we have got the stimulant trend, but we've also got a trend. This also seems kind of generational. I'm curious what you think about it. You would know. This trend of guys turning to sort of the more ancient churches in Christianity, whether it's Orthodox or Catholic, it's definitely happening. It's causing a bit of a stir in some quarters. Some of our more classically liberal friends are like, "Oh, what's happening? This isn't the right that I know." Are you seeing this in your own circles, and how big of an impact do you think it's going to make?
I am. It's going to be great. It's inevitable. I am a traditional mackerel-snapping papist. I prefer liturgy reverently in Latin, ideally. But I know some people are clutching their pearls and they don't know what to make of it. We are not the first people to make the observation that in the West, and specifically in America, people are going to go back toward the Catholic Church. Maybe you are seeing a little bit Eastern Orthodox. The first guy to really prominently make this observation in America was all the way back in the 19th century, and it was no less a figure than Alexis de Tocqueville, who in the second volume of Democracy in America said, look, America is a Protestant country, and there are all these different Protestant sects, but over time, he predicted that Americans would either become Catholic or they would give up Christianity altogether. And he didn't go into great detail on why he saw this happening, but he thought it was just a function of the American government. The various Protestant sects were a little bit unstable. He actually thought it was a feature of democracy that people would return to the Catholic Church. But also you're seeing this especially on the right, because, not casting any shade to my many Protestant friends, but Protestantism is an intrinsically liberal political movement. So I know there are a lot of hardline right-wingers who would dispute that characterization. I'm not saying that they have aberrant views on immigration or taxes or whatever. I'm just saying that the project of Protestantism was one of individual emancipation and liberation. It's no coincidence that liberalism as a political ideology comes about shortly after the Protestant Revolution. And so I think people are working through that right now, that, what started out to some people sounding like a good idea of getting rid of the Pope has really just led to an infinite number of popes. Every man becomes his own pope, that it leads to a kind of relativism. You saw this in the Treaty of Augsburg and the Peace of Westphalia, the notion cuius regio, eius religio, the king gets to decide religion for everybody. And then you see this with the the constant splitting up of various churches, go through divorces, and so you've got this kind of Southern Baptist and this kind of Southeastern Baptist, and it just kind of seems to lead to the same radical individualism that the liberals have been foisting on us for centuries now. Newman, who was a rather anti-Catholic Protestant, and he became a Catholic cardinal, then he became a Catholic saint. He observed that the real distinction here is Catholics and Protestants have individual conscience, but for the Catholics, we also recognize the authority of the Church, of the magisterium, ultimately even of the Supreme Pontiff, whereas for Protestants of various stripes, it kind of ends with the individual conscience. And so when you have a disagreement over Scripture, over some matter of ecclesiology even, you're not going to have any way to reconcile those conflicts. So now that we live in a kind of crazy upside down world where we don't even know what a woman is anymore, I am not at all surprised that people are becoming a little bit more trad. You got the ortho bros, and even more pronounced you have the Catholics. And as a papist, I'm all for it.
Well, as your friendly neighborhood ortho bro myself, I certainly think that Tocqueville's thesis is due for an update right about now that there's more than zero Orthodox in America. Very interesting. But he is the place to look, and I think there's just so much. This is a rich vine, and conservatives and frankly anyone ignores this stuff at their peril. Tocqueville's thesis, which I think has been borne out. I'm not the only one to make these kinds of crazy claims that Tocqueville might have been right about what he saw in America, and he said, I don't endeavor to see better than my colleagues, but to see further, and I think he certainly did that. His concern with Protestantism in America, I think you could boil it down to the idea that this is a very individualistic approach to the faith, and that under democratic conditions where everyone is kind of more or less psychologically equal, they see each other as equals. If someone's way up ahead, they're like, well, why should that guy have all the money? He's just like me, that kind of thing. Narcissism of small differences, as Freud would sort of describe it later. And so what he saw in Americans was, yes, they had this individualism, they had this restlessness. They were always on the move. They were always looking for an edge, always looking for a way to grab onto the good things of life before they slipped away, and always feeling like sort of the future was moving too fast for them to keep up with or to catch up to. And so what he saw is for people like that, they needed some kind of anchoring in their heart, a stable place when all around them was in flux and in turmoil, fortunes rising and falling, technology continuing to advance. He came upon a log cabin in the woods that was unfinished, and he sort of sighed and felt the pain of, they didn't even finish building their log cabin in the woods, and they moved on to the next place. For people like that, if they don't have that kind of deep spiritual anchor in their heart, then they're going to feel like one false move or one hard knock in life, and they're just going to hit rock bottom immediately. That's kind of what he was worried about. And, I think you look around and you see a lot of people in that predicament today, looking for something that has a bit of a deeper root. And under digital conditions, we're thrown back these kind of questions about, well, okay, why should I even be human? Why should I get out of bed in the morning? Why should I have children? Why should I date? Why should I ever log off? And those questions are ultimate questions. And if you're looking for the ultimate answers, you're moving into theological territory. I know sorry, go ahead.
No, I love your point on the digital conditions. I think that's a huge part of this, because we live in an age where you can ignore your body most of the time. I mean, some people still have to do jobs that involve them actually doing things, but for a lot of people, they're just logged onto their computer most of the time. And in people's leisure time, supposed leisure, I don't think any of us really has leisure anymore, but in our leisure time, we're all just doom scrolling. We're existing through avatars that are digital, divorced from the body. An extreme of this is, of course, the ideology of transgenderism that says the body has nothing to do with my true identity, that I can really just be a spirit floating through the ether, or at least through the tubes and the wires that connect the internet together. But we recognize, well, hold on, I still am this body. I still exist in time and space, and so I'm going to have to do something with my body. And I think that, especially when you get into some of the iconoclasm that attends to various Protestant denominations, there's this fiction that we can do without images, we can do without statues, we can do without sacraments, we can do without kneeling and postures and putting our voice into it, that the faith can just be something in our own heads that doesn't need any actual expression in the world. But that's not really possible. Because even if you go into the beautiful cathedral, you go into a nice Eastern Orthodox church, and you've got all this lovely Byzantine art, or if you go into a traditionalist Catholic church with all the statues, you tear all of it down, you whitewash all the buildings. We're back in Congregationalist New England with no images to look at. Well, even when you close your eyes and pray to God, there is going to be some image there, because we're human beings, and our thoughts and our desires are mediated through images, inevitably, through signs and symbols like the words that we're using right now. And so that is inescapable. The only question is not going to be, do I do anything with my body or not? It's going to be, what do I do with my body? It's not, will we have images or not? It's, what kind of images are we going to have? And this gets then to the real observation that people, I think, are coming to, at least implicitly today, which is lex orandi, lex credendi. The way that I worship is going to inform the way that I believe. It's not necessarily the other way around. It's what I do. If I receive our Lord in the Holy Eucharist, kneeling on the tongue at an altar rail, in a position of reverence, that is going to affect the way that I think about it. But American Catholics now, a third of them don't even believe in transubstantiation. They don't believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Why? Well, might it have something to do with the deformations that followed the Second Vatican Council that tell us to take the Eucharist in the hand, ignoring crumbs, particles that ostensibly are our Lord, body, soul, blood, and divinity? Might it have something to do with the casual way that we treat religion? Well, all right, if that's led us to a deformation of our belief and a deformation of our lives, then maybe we got to put our bodies back into it, baby, and maybe actually by behaving in a certain way, that will fix the intellectual problems that we seem to be suffering from.
Well, there's no doubt that we are incarnate beings as far as Vatican II is concerned. I will say I'm sorry that happened to you. But so much of what's going on in this debate, to me, it just seems obvious that, the West has created technology that's so powerful that it's really kind of broken like the modern Western sense of identity of what the West even is. And, in some ways that's fruitful, and in some ways it's probably inevitable, where, this is kind of a construct that's emerged over time, and obviously it involves eternal truths and trying to figure out what to do about them and how to reconcile the prerogatives of faith with the obligations of politics. And, there's obviously lots of stuff there, and all of our smart guys can talk about it and argue about it. But what people are looking for right now, it just seems to me to be so clear, is they're looking for spiritual authorities they can trust, because the technology has become so powerful that you can't really just turn to, your rationalist friend and say, like, tell me, smart, expert friend of mine, how do I hold on to my identity as a human being in an age when computers and machines can almost simulate the soul? They don't really have those answers, and you're not really going to find them in sort of like, free market economic theory. You got to look somewhere else. And I know for some of our guys, they're like, oh, spiritual authority, that's red flag. What are you telling me, that I have to, listen to the Pope for my political identity? What John F. Kennedy went through, or the Orthodox version of that? Oh, are you telling me that Rasputin was a good guy? It's like, okay, hold on. Look at what's happening to our country. Look at the way that so many people are, searching, sort of stumbling around, looking for someone they can trust about the fundamental matters of human existence, our relationship to the divine, our status as created beings, how we can keep ourselves in kind of orderly formation as we go into this world where, like you said, some people, they soberly looked at the information, at the situation that we're in, and they said, okay, I figured it out. Rationally, the most important thing that we can do to keep a grip on our humanity is to start severing the genitals from our children, right? We've seen kind of what that approach takes, and, I gotta say, our opposite numbers on the left, some of those guys, they looked at it and they said, hey, we got to leave the Marxism. We got to leave the materialism behind. We need to create a new religion for ourselves, because if we don't have a religion, a faith, then we're just not going to be able to make it in this world.
Of course. You think about the authority, the crisis of authority in technology. Ana Navarro, the fake Republican who just spends all her time attacking Republicans, she got in trouble because she was defending the Hunter Biden pardon, and she said, well, look, this has happened before. Woodrow Wilson pardoned Hunter Butts way back in the early 20th century. And people did a little fact check, and they realized not only did Woodrow Wilson not issue a pardon similar to Biden's of Hunter, but there's no such person as Hunter DeButts in or around the Woodrow Wilson administration. Hunter DeButts is just a kind of a punchline, you know, like Seymour Butts or something like that, when you prank phone call somebody. So Anna Navarro looked really silly, and she said, well, hold on, I asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT told me that Hunter DeButts was pardoned by Wilson. I think, well, no, lady, you are giving far more credence to the authority of ChatGPT than perhaps any Catholic has ever given to the Pope. You're just misplacing where you identify that authority. And so the authority is a big question about this, because so many people in our liberal age even hate that word. You know, it's the A word. We want all the control for ourselves. We prefer autonomy to authority, but it's an inevitable problem that you have to get to. You think about it just within your own church. Two people in the church disagree over what Scripture means. How are you going to figure out who's right? What's the hermeneutic? You know, who's got the control? Well, probably you'd take it to your pastor. Maybe your pastor has some idea, but Pastor Joe disagrees with Pastor Keith. Well, what happens when the pastors disagree? Well, we used to have this idea that you could go to someone who was a little bit higher up the chain than them. I don't know, let's call that person a bishop, let's say. And then the bishop would, come to some conclusions, but then the bishops disagree. Well, sometimes there used to be this idea that we would call big meetings of the bishops. We'd call them councils. But what happens if all the bishops are disagreeing? On the unresolvable question, there has to be someone who makes the final judgment. Just like you and your wife are debating to get Chinese food or McDonald's for dinner. If you're at an impasse, someone just has to decide. And so the question for us then is, well, who has that authority? Who or what has that authority? And I think you're right, James. I think now we, in our rationalist age, without any of the good rationalism of the scholastics, just the modern rationalism where these people are totally unmoored, we want to give it to some guy in a lab coat. We want, and even better, we want to take the humanity out of it entirely. We just want to ask a robot. But guess what? If you trust the robots, sometimes they're going to lead you all the way to Seymour DeButts, and you're going to be all the worse off for it.
Well, I was under the impression that Hunter DeButts was the pseudonym of Hunter Biden when he was a sex tourist in Ukraine, but I appreciate you clearing up the matter for me. I am tempted to engage you in a proper theological debate about the supremacy of the ecumenical councils, but maybe something that people would be slightly more interested for the purposes of this interview. I think you and I probably both want to be very clear that the goal here is not theocracy. And there is now I guess a thriving but small segment of folks somewhere on the right who are saying, like, hey, look, this is where things need to go. Is if you accept the idea that people need spiritual authority that they can trust, if you accept the idea that there's a better form of government versus a worse form of government, then America has failed the experiment. We tried it. It didn't work. We got to go straight back to theocracy. This is the sort of eternal form of government that's the best. Christ was king, so we need a king, and that needs to be a Christian king, and that's the form of government that America should have. I think that's a mistake. You look at America, you look at the American people, it's 300 million people. You can't just flip a switch and say, my philosophy tells me that this is the best thing to do, so now I'm going to impose it on you. I think that's a terrible mistake. And I would also go so far as to say, speaking as someone who knows a thing or two about Orthodox theology at this point, what the Orthodox say about this question is you don't want to fuse a super strong regime, government, with a super strong church. You want a healthy church, you want a healthy government, and you want symphonia. You want a harmony between them, which is much different than a theocratic form of government, which, that is what the wokies were offering. They were offering woke theocracy.
Yes, and this is like all of these questions. It turns out we're not the first people to ever think of them.
Believe it or not.
They've been debated for a long time. Believe it or not. I think one of the great writers on this subject actually is my favorite poet, Dante, who in one of his minor works, Monarchia, took on this issue because in his day, one of his least favorite prelates, Pope Boniface VIII, whom he puts in hell, Boniface VIII claimed in a papal bull, Unam Sanctam, that the church had to possess two swords, that the church had to have both the total temporal authority and spiritual authority. And Dante has a really great syllogistic argument in this book, Monarchia, on how this is not backed up by scripture. This is not really even backed up in the history of the church. And you don't want that. You want something that's closer to what you're describing as a harmony. And this is also in part because man has two ends. And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier about man being a body, but also being a soul. That we have a natural happiness that we're looking for. And natural happiness includes being able to have a family and being able to feed your family and being able to put clothes on your family and succeeding in your career and all the sort of normal, natural things we like. But man, being not only body, but also soul, also has supernatural ends. And so we have two authorities to look after these two ends of man, both appointed by God, is the traditional Christian understanding, the civil authority and the spiritual authority. And but this does not mean that we need a firm separation of church and state that I don't think has ever existed anywhere in the world, and certainly has not existed in America, despite the claims of the left. But there is a distinction between the church and the state. And just as you can't really make sense of man's temporal ends without paying some attention to his eternal ends, so too the temporal authority, being distinct, can be illuminated by the light of the spiritual authority. But they do really have different, albeit somewhat overlapping ends and realms, and also given the look, being the Pope is a big job. Okay, I don't think we need to have him like paving the roads as well. It's there are people who can handle these things, and but working together in a unity is the ideal way to do it.
Well, you know, I'm a big fan of the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, 10th Amendment, all the amendments. You know, we love all our beautiful amendments. But I gotta say, you know, there is a weakness there in that First Amendment, where the founders and pretty much every American at that time, and probably most people in the world at that time, had the thought of either a thing is a religion or it isn't. And so if you're ensuring that there isn't going to be an established religion in your country, they weren't even thinking of, you know, where we were just a few years ago, or arguably, you know, still are in some respects, where a lot of folks on the left who did kind of make that turn of saying we're going to create a new religion, but we're not going to call it a religion. We're going to call it best practices and DEI and ESG and this laundry, BLM, you know, this constellation of catchphrases and jargon and verbiage, and it's going to be a religion in everything but name. It's all too easy to establish that, and you know, it's you know, I don't know exactly if you can or should kind of tweak the First Amendment a little bit to cover that, because it just seems like a huge loophole that they just sailed straight through.
I think it's in part because we're much dumber than we were at the time of the founding and the ratification of the Constitution. So at the time of the ratification, first of all, as your audience well knows, but many people do not know, one of the arguments for not establishing a church at the national level is that there were established churches at the state level, which would have created a massive political problem, and some of those churches endured for decades after ratification. Right. So it's not that you can't have any church anywhere in any way affiliated with the government, but they were resolving a real problem there. The other one, though, is people understood at that time that in order to make laws, you have to appeal to practical morality. And to appeal to practical morality, you have to have a sense of the moral order, transcendent morality. And if you were to make sense of justice and rights and obligations and the moral law, you ultimately have to have some reference to a moral lawgiver. Ultimately, this rests on some basic religious principles, which is why John Adams says in a private letter that Christianity, the principles on which independence was won were the principles of Christianity in which all the sects agree. John Adams was not exactly the most orthodox, lowercase o, Christian going, but he recognized, as did basically all of our framers, that you need to have recourse to some basic sense of religion. And, you know, we won't quibble about the details, but, you know, come on, man, you can't make a law without moral reasoning. And today, the ignorant perverts who run our country, they just seem to think that you can. And because you can't, they just smuggle in, as you say, all of their moral priors, which are wrong. I guess we should call them immoral priors. They just smuggle them in. And so ironically enough, they essentially establish a church at the national level. It's just an anti-church. It's a It's the church of the prince of this world, maybe.
Well, speaking of basic moral reasoning, my exhaustive show notes here say that you actually supported the pardon of Hunter Biden. What's going on there?
It's not that I supported it. It's that I was not surprised by it at all. I don't see any world in which it didn't happen. And I do think there's something kind of delightful about it. Given that it was always going to happen, the only people who thought it wasn't going to happen were the people who thought that Joe Biden was going to tell the truth. Joe Biden, one of the most prolific and infamous liars in American history for half a century, he was all of a sudden now going to catch a whiff of honesty. Of course he was going to pardon his kid. And there is something understandable, if not admirable, about a guy looking out for his kid, not wanting to leave him out to dry for the next administration. There's also some self-interest because Hunter Biden's crimes implicate Joe Biden, and I think he didn't want him to flip on him. But furthermore, Democrats are going to pay a political cost for this. The Democrats ran on Trump as a threat to democracy and putting himself above the law. Democrats have lost the democracy argument now, in part because they tried to kick Trump off the ballot and imprison him and justify his assassination, and then he won the popular vote. So there goes the democracy argument. And then putting him above the law, as Joe Biden tweeted out, he said, no one's above the law. Then he pardons his son for any crime he may or may not have committed for a decade. That really makes the Democrats look like hypocrites. It really makes them look corrupt. And Joe Biden hates his own party at this point. His party threw him out in an unceremonious way. They called him demented. They replaced him with a woman that no one really likes at all, and she lost. And so I think this was one final little shiv that Biden gave to the party that overthrew him. People have short attention spans, so I don't think this is going to kill them for decades. But I do think that the 2026 midterms are going to be a little bit harder because of Joe Biden's flagrant corruption on the way out when he says, okay, Dems, you want to screw me over? Well, good luck next time.
Yeah, very much of a piece with him saying, okay, you like Kamala so much, I'm going to endorse her right now. And that just threw a huge monkey wrench into their plans. Really delightful. You love to see it. I have to admit, I've written some fiction over the years. I'm a sort of empath, I guess, in that way. And when I look at Hunter Biden, I mean, it just seems to me like this is a guy who sees some really dark stuff. Like, he didn't ask to be Joe Biden's son, and he was really just kind of dispatched as this weird sort of insider kind of bagman guy, and didn't seem like he had a huge amount of choice in what it was that he got up to. And when I see the crack pipe, and I see the cheap whores and everything, and the poop art, and I think this doesn't just naturally issue forth from the ordinary American soul. This is the result of someone who was really put through the ringer, probably saw a lot of dark stuff that ordinary people don't want to have to think about, much less encounter in their real lives. And I wouldn't be surprised, especially given the pardon, if he busted out the tell-all memoir at some point. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if this is a rumor or what, but I did see something about how perhaps he did even tell his father that he might just go ahead and write that memoir unless he was pardoned.
Okay, CJ, imagine.
I wouldn't be surprised. The Biden family has a lot of problems. You can tell a lot, if not everything, about a man by how everyone around him treats him. And Biden, I don't think, has lived really in a dignified way. So there's an irony, though, to the Hunter Biden pardon, which is that now that he is totally pardoned for any crime he might have committed, the Fifth Amendment would no longer apply. He can't incriminate himself because he can't be held liable for any federal crimes he commits. So in a way, if the Republicans want to pursue this, it might be easier for them to make him testify than it otherwise would have been, because now he can't keep mum. He can't just cite the Fifth Amendment. However, I don't think there's appetite for the Republicans to pursue this. In some ways, I wish that they would. I think that people need to be held to account, because if the Democrats think that they can get away with it this time, they're just going to keep getting away with it. So just as a matter of justice and prudence, I think you got to hold people accountable just so that they start to behave a little bit better. But I don't see any political appetite for that whatsoever. And if Hunter does write the tell-all memoir, He might just do it because he's furious and he's sick of burning his life away, giving 10 to 50% to the big guy, and he's so mired in vice and degeneracy that it just pours out of him naturally. But I don't think the Republicans are going to pull it out. I think they're going to move on. They're going to say, let's let bygones be bygones. And is that going to bite them next time, like Lucy with the football? Yes, it will, but we've never accused Republicans of learning anything.
No, I think you're right about the Republican appetite there, but I also think that you're right that we should hold people accountable, and that's why I've harvested a few more controversial things that you've said recently. They're important, and we need to know exactly what's going on. You're pushing to make Advent solemn again. Now, I'm a little worried that this means that you're going to take my spiked eggnog and my Mariah Carey away from me. So let's hear
Only
it.
one of those things is true.
How do you know when you've gone too far in making the Christmas spirit solemn?
Mariah Carey goes to the gulags until December 25th. There's that. That's a non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned. Now, can you keep your eggnog? I think you can. I don't think that solemnity. I mean, we were discussing. I'm a Catholic. We typically do not banish the booze.
You guys are drunk
for
all
almost
the time.
any occasion. Wherever the Catholic sun doth shine, there's good cheer and good red wine. I forget the rest of the Belloc quote, but
Two cigars in one hand,
your eggnog is
a
safe.
snifter of booze in the other.
Right. I think that, but we do, you actually do have to make Advent a thing again. Well, it is a thing, but you have to recognize it as a thing, because otherwise, Christmas is sort of a letdown. People take their trees down on Christmas. Christmas, there's a song about this. It's 12 days long. Okay. There's a play about that too. But now these people, they just rush it. And it's that line, I forget who said it. It was one of the quotables, who also knocking some of our more Protestant friends, but said, maybe it was Chesterton. With the Catholics, you have first the fast and then the feast. But with some of the more modern approaches, you have first the feast and then the hangover. So you don't want to rush these things. It's important. We're preparing for the coming of our Lord and a sign of the second coming of our Lord. And so you want to think about that. The final four things that traditionally one thinks about during Advent are death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And it seems a little depressing, I guess. But the irony is it's not. The people who think about death, judgment, heaven, and hell, I think about it every day. The people who think about it, in my experience, tend to be happier and more joyful. The people in modernity who never want to talk about death, they certainly don't want to talk about judgment or hell, and their version of heaven is something out of a Hallmark card. Those are the people who are neurotic, who are anxious, who are taking all the depression pills, who are constantly suffering from angst. And the reason is, you can't really ignore it. We all know we're going to die, and as you get a little older, it can either drive you crazy or it can allow you to prepare for those final things. So, I think it's look, the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. When we lived in a religious age, people were relatively well balanced. They might have died a bit younger, and they might have, had weaker dental care or something. But society still worked. People still had kids. People weren't all lying on psychiatrists' couches, taking pills to numb the pain all the time. Now you have 1 in 5 American women is on depression pills. 2020 to 2022, you saw 130% spike in teenage girls taking depression pills. You see a huge spike in overdoses and deaths of despair among men. Why is that? It's because our culture of ignoring the final things is just driving us all completely up a wall. So celebrate, get your Christmas ham ready. It's going to be a lot of fun. But consider what it actually means. Otherwise you are not going to be merry this season, no matter how much you try.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that deep down we all understand that heaven is not endless reruns of Love Actually. Yeah.
I mean, look, I like the Joni Mitchell song. Okay, I've looked at love from both sides now. Whatever. It's nice stuff. But guys, come on. There's a little bit more to it than a Hugh Grant movie.
Well, do you think that there is a sort of American hangover when it comes to commercialism? There are still some guys out there who are like, Black Friday nationalism, buy it, the bigger the better. But again, maybe this is one of those generational things. People who have grown up really, enjoying Call of Duty more than enjoying enjoying getting lost in Toys R Us. It's just a different feel to it.
Yes, it is. And as always, virtue is the mean between two extremes. So I'm not saying you got to deprive your kids of presents, or you don't take them to see Santa Claus at the mall or whatever. It's okay. But maybe the kid doesn't need 100 presents. Maybe you get him a few things that he can really enjoy. I mean, otherwise you just get so trapped and you become possessed by your possessions. And the thing is, you realize that it's all going to break and it's all going to become outdated. These days, a new cell phone, which costs $1,000 a piece, you get a new cell phone every 3 weeks or something. So you're just rapidly trying to keep up with this pace of technological innovation, and it's all ultimately unsatisfying. At a certain point, once you've finished watching your show, and once you've finished watching my show every day of the week on your iPhone, then, and you download it and you get those ratings in there, then maybe put the phone away and sit outside,
just throw
have a
it
cigar,
away.
Maybe a Mayflower.
It served its purpose.
Just kind of, that's right.
Are you a Santa denier?
I am not. I am a big Santa respecter. I am, in fact, a Santa maximalist, and I think we need to pay more attention to Santa. We just recently celebrated the feast of St. Nicholas, and there is a story, I'm pretty sure apocryphal, but it won't stop me from believing it, of Santa showing up to the Council of Nicaea to hear the ravings of the heresiarch Arius, who denied the divinity of Christ. And Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, was, out of care, out of charity, was so concerned for this heresiarch's lunacy that he gave him a corrective slap, which over the mists of time, this story, Santa Claus punching a heretic in the face because he couldn't stand hearing his nonsense anymore. And that's important. We first of all, we need a little bit more of a robust discourse. We need people to have more of the courage of their convictions. We need clarity on matters. It's not just all you do you, don't yuck my yum. We need clarity. Clarity is charity, baby. And the legends of Santa Claus are based on real things. St. Nicholas of Bari, and maybe giving kids little toys. And it's where we get the meme that Santa Claus came here to give presents to kids and to punch heretics in the face, and by golly, he's all out of presents.
Anyone with even a drop of Mediterranean blood understands that sometimes a little slap is, it's because I love you.
Old Saint Nick was restrained, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
If it was only one corrective slap, that requires a great deal of virtuous restraint.
That is not an endorsement of domestic violence. That is not an endorsement of domestic violence. One more controversy.
But it is an endorsement of punching heretics. No,
yeah,
no,
okay.
it's not.
Yeah. One more controversy for you. IVF. This one has really been tearing it up lately. It's not hard to understand where people are coming from on both sides of it, and that's probably one reason why it's so controversial, is because it is so messy. It does kind of drag you kicking and screaming into this kind of weird ethical zone. What do you think is going to happen on the right and across America on this issue, given the force of all this tech going forward?
Well, what should happen is that we shouldn't do IVF anymore. It's totally morally unacceptable. However, I get why people want it. I understand. My wife and I dealt with infertility for 2 years. The fertility doctors are always trying to sell you IVF, and I was tempted to do it. Even I have a pretty well-grounded opposition to it. I was tempted to. I totally get it. But it is totally morally unacceptable. I think part of the reason why people buy into it now is also because it's a relatively novel technology, and people just haven't thought through the implications of it. So for a long time in the West, I actually don't really know the Orthodox stance on it, but the Catholics were totally opposed to it from the beginning, and they were basically alone. Recently, the Southern Baptists have just come out and said, look, this is morally unacceptable, but it's going to take people a while to figure out why. And I agree with them. I think they're right about that. The arguments for IVF, as far as I can tell, amount to, without IVF, I wouldn't have my kid, so screw you, shut your mouth. And more babies is always a good thing. What's the matter with you? I thought you were pro-life. Those are the two arguments for it. And they're not really arguments. Those are emotional pleas, albeit totally understandable ones. But we don't really believe that anything that produces a child is morally acceptable. You can produce a child through adultery. You can produce a child through rape. Or is that a just cheating on your wife or committing a rape, God forbid? Certainly not. So no one really believes that the ends justify the means in any way to produce a child. But how about on, I wouldn't have my kid without it. Yes, you can be grateful for the good of your child. It is good to have a child. You can be grateful for the good that you have received without trying to bend yourself over backwards to justify something that is intrinsically immoral. The clearest reason for people, which I think is the weakest argument for the immorality of IVF, but the clearest reason that resonates for people is that in practice, IVF creates a lot of little babies. And for every one baby that is actually survives and is gestated and is born, you could have 5, 10, 20 embryos that are created, human beings, and then placed in a freezer indefinitely or more likely destroyed in the long run. So if one is pro-life, if one really believes life begins at conception, as it obviously does, then one cannot consistently oppose abortion and support IVF. IVF will explode the rate of abortion, but not only by multiples, maybe by orders of magnitude. But again, that's still kind of a consequentialist argument, or it's an incidental argument to it. The real reason that IVF is immoral, morally unacceptable, is that it inverts the order of rights in reproduction, and it creates the notion that people somehow have a right to a child. But you can't have a right to a child. You can't have a right to a person, because people are not objects or commodities to be traded. People are proper subjects with rights themselves. So now people go to the baby store and they go, in the extreme of it, they'll go purchase the eggs of some woman, then rent the womb of another poor woman, then have the child gestate, then rip the child away from the only mother that he's ever known, and intentionally deny the child the ability to know his natural mother, so that two homosexuals or something can pretend to be a family, which is, I understand the desire. It's a natural desire to have kids, but that is totally unacceptable. It is abusive to the child, and it establishes the domination of science and technology over the origin and destiny of human life. So now you see court cases where, doctors will implant the wrong embryo. There's a major court case going on right now. Doctors will implant the wrong embryo. So, a white couple gives birth to an Asian baby. They say, wait a second, I don't know that this is my baby, or vice versa. And then they raise these children for months and months. They have to figure out what to do. Do you now rip the child away from the only mother he's ever known, or one of the only two mothers he's ever known? Or do you just tell the mother, well, give it up. We're going to go trade them someday in the back of a parking lot. I mean, it's so nasty. It's so degrading to the human person. And it also creates the notion, it actually creates a market for children to be purchased to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I just don't see, I've never heard any even remotely compelling argument for it beyond the emotional appeal, which is in itself compelling.
Well, I think this is a very American predicament, and we talked a little bit about Tocqueville and about technology and about the character of American social and cultural life, and it does seem like this is one of those situations where people feel like we don't have a theocracy, we don't have an established church, there's no official spiritual authority that we all share, and therefore ain't nobody going to tell me how I can or can't use technology. And if we go down that road, people think, well, pretty soon we're just going to have, some person who doesn't have any higher moral standing than you or me just passing laws forcing us to we have to use electric cars, or we have to reduce our carbon footprint, or, there's nothing to, I have to have a robot assigned to my child to take the place of a parent. Americans seem to me to be really afraid that if it's not a free-for-all on technology, then someone is going to rule their lives through technology.
Right, although I do think there is a popular sentiment that people want some controls over technology, even if they say that they don't. And I think about this in the 90s when the internet was really becoming popular. There was a law passed, actually, the Communications Decency Act, which now we talk about that because of Section 230 that might regulate social media companies or might let them off the hook. But the Communications Decency Act was about decency in communications. It was chiefly about regulating porn on the internet. And unfortunately, judges struck down the strong provisions that had support support among Democrats and Republicans, a Republican House signed into law by a Democrat president. There was another law, the Child Online Protection Act, same story. It was to regulate porn on the internet, and liberal activist judges struck down the really important aspects of that law and allowed the internet to be a free-for-all. But in principle, we already do regulate technology tremendously. We obviously regulate your automobiles. We obviously regulate every part of your home. And we do regulate the internet. At least the one regulation we have on pornography now that's still enforced is that you can't trade child pornography. You can be arrested. You'll go to jail for that. Obviously, I don't think all but the most hardened perverts would say that that's a bad thing. You can't trade drugs on the internet. You can't contract an assassin on the internet. The guy who ran the Silk Road, Ross Ulbricht, went to jail for that. So we do have limitations on how you can use technology because, getting back to what we were talking at the top of it, in the end, technology is still real life. When you're in the digital sphere, you are still morally culpable for how you treat people, how you speak, how you behave, the kind of content that you consume. That's going to really shape your character in the real world. There's no escaping the real world. There's no going into some alternative universe on social media or on other technologies. So no, we have to regulate it as we would in anything. So the people who say, well, hey man, get your big government hands off of my technology, you say, okay, the logical conclusion of that impulse, that gesture of the intellect, is just anarchism, I guess. To say we're not a theocracy, so therefore we really can't have laws against murder or against theft or against anything, I guess. But in as much as we grant that the civil authority has rights to pass laws based on practical morality, it would seem to me that we can also have laws against abortion, or what will soon become the leading cause of abortion, in vitro fertilization, which needs to be regulated or banned for many other reasons as well.
Well, you've heard me go off on this, I'm sure, once or twice. If we go down this path, and I think we've already started to go down this path, what ends up happening is that technology itself and the logic of technology becomes the spiritual authority and becomes the established religion. So, I've been out here for years now saying, like, look, in America, it's important that Americans have a hands-on approach to their technology, that they don't feel alienated and distant and sort of servants of their technology. And in order to accomplish that, we got to make sure that the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, that these things extend to online life, that Americans can mine Bitcoin and use it and have high-powered GPUs and not have the government tell them this computer is too powerful for you, it only belongs to us. That's all really important in order for Americans to maintain that confident, competent relationship, ordinary people with extraordinary technologies, even if yes, some of them will be ripe for abuse in the same way that a gun is ripe for abuse. Yes, there's a certain amount of risk there, but if the people cannot develop that habit of bearing that risk responsibly, then it's going to lead us to a very dark place. But I've got friends in tech who they're cheering along, yes, come and take it, and they've got their flag with their GPU on it, and that's why we need to make sure that Americans have a constitutional right to become cyborgs. And it's sort of like record scratch. How do you walk that line where you got guys like you and me, we understand that America does need to maintain a commercial culture of competence and a free access to the most important kinds of technologies, so they don't just become part of the glittering tower that the elite post-humanists live in, without opening up the floodgates where you say, like, oh yeah, you want to have cat girls, you want to have 3 heads, you want to have an enormous machine growing out of your body, go for it, baby, it's your life, you do you.
We need to have standards and norms. I mean, it gets back to the gun argument, and I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, about as strong a supporter as there can be. But it is simply a fact. People have to be able to use their guns responsibly. They need to exercise their rights. They need to know how to use their gun. They need to pass this knowledge on to their children. They have to really do it. If they do not, their guns will be taken away from them. They'll end up ceding their rights away. They'll end up ceding that technology away. I don't care what the Second Amendment says. That will happen because order will be maintained. There will be order. I promise you that. I think that is a first principle political philosophy. So the same goes here for technology. if people can responsibly use their technology, they will keep their rights. They will have a great deal of strength. They could be really edified by that. And if people abuse technology, if they, in the words of the men who built our country, if they abuse liberty to license, then they'll kill themselves. I mean, they will turn themselves into weird little cyborgs, decadent little creatures that can be controlled and manipulated quite easily by technology or by the government or by a technical government that is being run by ChatGPT. That's just going to happen. And so we need to have a far greater exercise of standards and norms. And what that's going to feel like to a lot of people is the restriction of individual liberty. I don't think it really is the restriction of individual liberty. I think it's an expansion of individual liberty, because the only way to make sense of our individual liberty is as social creatures, what Burke would call the spirit of an exalted liberty, even as you tamp down your basest appetites and passions, which we lie to ourselves and say will free us, but actually enslave us. That's what's going to happen. You have to tell people no, because as C.S. Lewis wrote when he was predicting the rise of transhumanism and the cyborgs, he said, every time we seem to take a step forward in this path, we also take a step back. Everything that we say is going to augment our humanity is actually diminishing part of our humanity, to the point that we make it all the way to Yuval Harari's prediction that Homo sapiens will cease to exist because we will create the new Homo Deus. We'll make man as a god. Well, okay, what has the conclusion of that been then? The conclusion is the abolition of man. Something that I do not wish to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to freak out about, and you and I have talked about this before, just kind of the parade of horribles, whether it comes out of Harari or some of these other guys, people who are trying to build their clones or merge with their machines. It's easy for Christians of any stripe really to look at that stuff and immediately start panicking about the Antichrist and about the end times and about kind of the horrors that people would be subjected to until the very end of days. At the same time, though, you were Padre Pio posting a little while ago, right? Pray and don't worry, and there's a long list of Orthodox saints that would probably take up the remainder of our time to enumerate them, saying, do not lose your inner peace. If your heart is not prepared for Christ to take up residence there, then you can just say goodbye to all the other stuff. It doesn't matter if you memorize all the rituals. It's about what's in here, which is where the possibility of salvation and of peace really begins. How do you live that out? Do you encounter folks in your circles who really seem to be kind of as frantic and desperate and worried about the future? And how do you convince them that you can relax without being irresponsible about it?
Well, I was Padre Pio posting and often Aristotle posting as well. And one way to do it is to find the mean between two bad extremes. One extreme is this constant, frantic worrying about the sky is going to fall and we need to save the world, and which you're not going to do, by the way. And we need to just get through. If we just get through this one election, everything's going to be all better, and we're going to cast the devil out of the world. And that's not going to happen. And if you think that's going to happen, then you're going to be even more depressed and more anxious. The flip side of that, the other awful extreme, is a political quietism that says, well, I should have absolutely nothing to do with public life, and it doesn't matter at all. I'll just retreat into asceticism. For most people, you probably shouldn't be a monk. You actually do have an obligation to participate in public life, and you were born in a time for a reason, and you have obligations to that. So you need to find a mean that is between these two things. You say, look, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to fight evil as I can. I'm going to advance virtue as I can. But I'm also going to recognize that I really won't save the world. I can cooperate with God's grace, and God will save the world. And it would be sinful, actually, for me not to cooperate with God's grace. but I'm just going to play my part. And I'm not really the author of this story. So, following Padre Pio, we pray, we hope. Hope is a theological virtue, grounded in fact, by the way, not just a happy feeling, but if you believe in the incarnation, if you believe in the crucifixion and the resurrection, then that's a fact. You know, the Gospels are journalism, not just poetry. And so you believe in that, and then you don't worry about it because it's really a little bit above your pay grade. And when you're worried and you're frantic, not only are you unlikely to help anybody, you're also going to perhaps lose yourself, and you could fall into despair, which is a major sin. You know, you've got to just a friend of mine uses this phrase all the time, and I think it's a really important guiding light for politics, which is be normal. Just be normal. I implore you. I'm reaching out through the screen and I'm shaking you by your shoulders. Please be normal. Your audience probably does that better than most, but it's good because norms has two meanings. There's normal, like what everybody does, what's common behavior, and then there's also norms, you know, up in the sky, this ideal that we reach for. And ideally, what we would like to do is bring those two things a little bit closer together and just, you know, look, the fundamental things apply as time goes by. So that's going to remain the case. Don't lose yourself because you think that you're the most important figure in history. You're not.
Michael Knowles, normie nationalist. That's about all the time we got. Good to see you. Hope to see you again soon. And you have a very solemn yet cheerful time out there.
Yes, and I'll be sure to drink eggnog in your stead.
Cheerio. That's all the time we got. Until next time around, I am James Willis. This is 0 Hour, and God have mercy.
Sharp, jagged points. Before I could react, it shoved me, sending me crashing into the floor. I watched in horror as it grabbed Amy, forcing her down.
Alex!
She screamed.
So, this story happened to my mum's friend in Korea about 10 years ago. Every time I hear this story, I still get chills.
Its fingers drip.
My mum's friend lived in an apartment complex in Seoul. She was a stay-at-home mother with a young daughter, and her husband was working during the days. One day, she was coming home from running errands with her daughter and got onto the elevator in her building. When she got inside the elevator, she noticed there was a man wearing a cap and a yellow raincoat, and he kept his head low, so she couldn't really see his face. She immediately felt really uneasy, and she made her daughter stand by her side, the side farthest away from the man. What made her feel even more uncomfortable was when she pressed the button for her floor, there was no other lit number. And on top of that, she noticed that he was carrying something wrapped inside newspaper close to his side. Things started to click in my mum's friend's head, and she started to panic and decided to take out her cell phone and pretend she was calling home to her husband, who was obviously really not at home, but at work. She started saying things like, "Oh, I'm on the elevator and about to get off. Can you get the door for me?" And making it seem like her husband was waiting at home. When the elevator did reach her floor, she quickly got off and grabbed her daughter and started to walk as fast as she could to her apartment. She noticed that the man also got on her floor and was slowly following her down the hallway. When my mum's friend got to her door, she started banging on it really loudly and shouting, "Hey, Yobo, I'm home. Please open the door." Yobo means husband or dear. She was kind of pretending like he was coming to open the door. Upon seeing this, the man in the yellow raincoat started to walk away, back towards the elevator. When he seemed to be far enough away, my mum's friend quickly picked up her daughter and slid open her door's passcode thingy. This is usually how people get into their homes in Korea. And she started to frantically punch in her key code. But the problem was that the buttons would make sounds, so that the man knew that no one was going to answer the door for her. And he turned around and started to run back towards her. My mum's friend at this point was practically screaming. And the first thing she did when she opened the door was throw her daughter inside. When she got inside herself, she saw that the man was practically inches away from the door. But she managed to shut it and lock it just before he could wedge his hand or a weapon in through the door. Afterwards, looking through the door's peephole, she saw that the man was walking away, back towards the elevator. Several months passed, and my mum's friend was watching the news, and there was a coverage on the capture of a serial killer named Yu Young Chul, who used to kill a lot of prostitutes. She told my mum that she could never forget the dread she felt when she saw the all-too-familiar yellow raincoat and the same hat that he was wearing when he was apprehended.
As if I have always been living.
The person who submitted this story has included a wiki page on Yu Young Chul, in case anyone was curious. It also details all of his killings. A link to this page can be found in the description below.
He keeps his distance, silently observes me. Finally, he asked about my earrings. These are the earrings Thomas gave me when I was good, but I never dared to wear them until I became Lily.
Everyone deserves a fast and reliable connection, one that helps better their everyday through the things they value most: friends and family, education and career. A connection that opens pathways to opportunity and builds roads to a better future. At Spectrum, we're committed to delivering just that every single day. Because with the right connection, anything is possible. That's Life Unlimited. That's Spectrum.
Life I've always dreamed of. I used the excuse of family matters to ask
My mom's experience with the dead.
Thomas texted
From Daniela S.
I was delighted that Thomas seemed to be getting closer to Lily. And at the same time,
My mom was in the hospital when she was 23. She'd gotten in a really bad motorcycle accident and had broken both her legs.
my true identity.
She'd also hurt her head really bad.
And ballet is the greatest.
It was late in the night, and she woke up from a very restless sleep. But she didn't open her eyes right away for some reason. Something in her told her to keep them shut.
Needed Lily.
My mom is from Vietnam and grew up in a very spiritual family. This subject isn't something she takes lightly.
Easily perform perfectly.
When she finally did open her eyes, it was because of a murmur, like someone was trying to talk to her.
Absolutely right.
Her hospital bed was surrounded by pale people. The whole room seemed to be filled with pale people, all trying to get a good look at her. But as soon as she looked at them, they all began to look down at their feet. She was in such shock that she kind of just calmed down and tried to make sense of it. The murmuring grew louder and louder until it sounded like the whole room was quietly mumbling, dozens of people mumbling to each other. But she couldn't see anyone's lips actually move. Then one of them lifted their hand and tried to reach out to her, still not looking at her. That's when my mom began to panic and scream. She says it felt like she blacked out until a nurse came running in, but my mom was found sitting up in bed. The nurse told her it was probably a hallucination from her concussion, and after a long time of soothing her, Mom finally went back to sleep.
Even if it was my life.
She didn't experience anything else until she got pregnant with me, and we moved to Korea.
Marrow fluid.
One day as she was taking the bus, she noticed that amongst the line of people getting on was a very familiar figure. A pale person who only looked at the ground. They boarded the bus. The bus driver didn't even seem to acknowledge them. My mother began to cry and became hysterical when the person moved down the middle of the bus. It was then she saw that they seemed to be floating. Their feet were flat against nothing beneath them. An older woman came to comfort her, and when Mom looked back where the person had been, they were gone.
I must replenish the spinal fluid.
From that day until we moved to America, she had no further problems.
I couldn't help but feel hot.
Eventually, she would be pregnant with my brother, and she began seeing these people everywhere. In the stores, in the streets, and even outside our home. It was a difficult pregnancy, She ended up going to the hospital a number of times with smaller complications. When she was there, she would scream and cry if she was ever left alone.
I couldn't think too much about it.
In the hospitals, it's where she saw them most. She said they were everywhere. Every which way she looked, they were there. The only way she'd feel safe was if someone was with her, because then the strange pale people wouldn't come any closer. The night after she gave birth to my brother, we were all sleeping in one room because she'd been pretty wrecked by the delivery. The hard pregnancy was nothing compared to actually giving birth to him. Dad says she nearly died, but I don't know how much of that is true. She woke up again in the middle of the night with my brother next to her, and again her bed was surrounded by those people. One of them was holding her hand on the baby's forehead. And at first, my mom freaked, until she noticed how my brother was pale. But instead of calling out for help, she didn't move. The pale woman stroked the baby's hair over and over, until he began to grow weak again. And finally, he took a breath. Then she woke up in the morning as a nurse came in to look at the baby. The pale people were gone. Dad and I were still sleeping, and nothing seemed different. The nurse looked over my brother and said that he was fine. Mom says that at that moment, she realized that whoever they weren't trying to hurt or scare her. She thinks they're just lost souls, or something of the sort, and that her son did almost die that night. But one of them helped him back to life. Then again,
Thomas's voice. Thomas immediately answered the phone. I could feel the joy in his voice. Each word of concern.
This happened a few years ago on Halloween. I'm 28 years old, and most people in my friend group get together for a Halloween party the weekend of Halloween. On this year, Halloween was on a weeknight, so our party was later in the week. That meant I didn't have anything going on Halloween. I live in a smaller house. I was just planning on hanging out and giving out candy to trick-or-treaters all night. By the time it got to be about 5 o'clock, the first trick-or-treaters arrived. I would say my neighborhood is pretty average. I don't get a crazy number of people, but a steady amount throughout the night. As time went on, the sun set a little after 6 o'clock or so. It was around this time when I was in my living room and heard a knock on the front door. It was a strong and powerful knock. Most people rang the doorbell, so I really noticed this. I was a little bit slow to get up and get to the door, and by the time I did, nobody was there. I felt bad, because some kid must have missed out on getting candy from me, and I meant to answer the door a little bit sooner. I looked around to see if I could see anybody walking down the street, but I didn't. After that, I went back inside. I got a few more kids at the door over the next hour or so. Once again, there was another loud knock on the door after that. I was much quicker to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. Now I was beginning to think that I was being pranked or something. When it got later, yet again, it was the only time people knocked on the door too. Everybody else would just ring the doorbell, so I knew when I heard the knock, whoever had done it would be gone by the time I answered. The last trick-or-treaters came by at about 8:45 or so, and by 9 o'clock, things were really quiet. At that point, I turned my lights off, signaling that I wouldn't want any more trick-or-treaters. It was about 9:30 when I heard the knocking yet again. I ran to the door and opened it as fast as I could. Still, nobody was there. I was pretty annoyed by this now. Who would have time to repeatedly knock on my door over the span of 3 or 4 hours just to run away before I could answer? I left my house and took a couple of steps out into my yard looking all around. I didn't see anybody. I called out, asking who was there, but of course got no response. I shook my head and started walking back into my house. When I reached my front step, I suddenly heard a noise in the bushes directly in front of my house and to my right. When I looked, I was just in time to see somebody emerge from the bush and was headed straight for me. This person was a grown man, and I had never seen him before. I had maybe 10 feet between him and the front door. I ran as fast as I could, pretty much just as a reaction. When I reached the door, I swung it back open and got inside. I closed the door right behind me, and it closed right on the man's arm who was trying to get inside after me. This was just my screen door, so it didn't hurt him too bad, but it was enough to cause him to remove his arm from the door and back outside. This gave me enough time to slam the larger door and lock it, right before he opened the screen door and tried coming into my house. I screamed that I was calling the police, and then got my phone out of my pocket to do so. I looked out the window, and I watched the man running away through my yard and then down the street, but I called the police anyways. When they arrived, I told them all I could, and this was thankfully enough to keep the man away, because I never saw him again.
I am uncomfortable sharing certain details about my story, so I will be purposely vague. This story happened back when I was in middle school. Against my wishes, my mom enrolled me into an after-school program called ELP, which stands for Extended Learning Program. I already hated school, and being forced to stay there for an extra hour pissed me off. I would usually get out at 4, but with the program, I was there until 5. I did well in school, and I didn't really need the extra time. My only guess is that my parents wanted me out of the house for another hour. My house was a short walk from the school, so I would usually be back by 5:20 at the latest. On the day in question, a huge storm passed through our town during the school day. When 5 o'clock rolled around, there was still an overcast in the sky, which made things darker than usual. As soon as I left the school grounds, I noticed this old station wagon moving slowly down the street toward me. Maybe it was just a confused grandmother of one of the students, unsure of where the drop-off was. I simply ignored it and continued on. It wasn't until I was a block down the road that I realized the vehicle was tailing me. I looked behind me to see something truly terrifying. Behind the wheel of the car was someone wearing a white mask with a creepy-ass smiley face on it. I should have taken off on foot, but instead I just stood there like an idiot as the car approached me. Soon, the wagon came to a stop next to me. I looked directly at the driver's creepy mask before a muffled voice spoke to me.
Hi.
I didn't respond.
Need a ride, kid?
I looked at the ground and shook my head. When I looked back, I was horrified to see that the driver was now pointing a gun at me. I took a few steps back. The driver then squeezed the trigger, and I heard a click.
Bang. You're dead.
The wagon then took off down the street. I stood there in total shock. Some jackass thought it was funny to point a gun at a 14-year-old kid. I ran home and immediately told my parents about what happened to me. The police were called. They ended up arresting the man a couple of hours later outside of a grocery store. Apparently he suffered from schizophrenia and was off of his meds. The gun he pointed at me was real, but was not loaded. Needless to say, he was locked up indefinitely.
We're going back almost 10 years ago now, but one morning I dropped my son off at school and then drove over to a nearby 7-Eleven with my infant daughter. It was pretty early in the morning, so there were only 1 or 2 other customers, and one of them was this older-looking guy with a walker who was slowly making his way around the store. I didn't pay him too much attention other than feeling kind of sorry for him. Then I picked up the few items I needed, then headed out to my car. Right as I'm putting my daughter in her car seat, I hear a voice behind me. I turn, and it's the old man with the walker. Only there's something weirdly different about him than when I saw him in the 7-Eleven. He was walking upright, not leaning on the walker, and his voice sounded much younger than you would have expected from just looking at him. I remember all he said was, "Cute kid." Then as I turned around, I only got the slightest look at the guy and his brand new posture before he slammed the walker into the back of my legs. The force made my knees buckle, and I almost fell right on top of my young daughter. I'm not exactly the tallest woman in the world, so the height reduction from my knees buckling had me falling forward into my open car door, and I had really tried not to crush her as I fell. I honestly thought that he was trying to get me, which was bad enough. But when he grabbed me by the hair and started to drag me up and off of my daughter, I realized he was trying to get to her instead. I honestly didn't think that I could get any more terrified, but the realization that he was actually trying to take my infant daughter away from me was just too much to bear. I remember letting out the loudest, most ear-splitting scream I've ever let out in my life, begging him not to take my baby. He was so much stronger and faster than he looked, and I guess that was all part of his fiendish scheme to have everyone let their guards down around him. It honestly seems like divine intervention now that I look back at it. But someone was just pulling into the small parking lot just as he almost had a hand on my daughter. And seeing the struggle had them instinctively honking their horn over and over in a bid to break it up. I think they figured it was just an incident of spousal abuse or something, because they were just honking and didn't get out of their car until I screamed over and over again, "He's trying to take my baby." The moment they heard that, they came bursting out of their driver's side door. But then the guy sprinted past the passenger side and out towards the main highway. The second he did, another car comes speeding up and stops by him, which I first thought might have been another person coming to tackle him or something. But instead, the guy climbs into the second car and speeds off with a screech of his tires. What horrified me in the aftermath was that it was quite clearly a well-planned and almost perfectly executed attempt to kidnap my daughter. And I wouldn't be surprised in the least bit if it had worked on a previous occasion. After the kind stranger calmed me down, they helped me call the cops as I tried my best to calm my daughter down in turn. She was still too young to really know what was going on, but she picked up on my distress enough to be wailing and crying until I managed to lull her off to sleep. The cops who arrived at the 7-Eleven a short while after said that they'd never heard of such a thing happening there before, but they were able to check the street cameras outside the 7-Eleven to try and get a clear image of the getaway car's number plate. I stuck around long enough to find out that the car's plates came back as stolen, and the cop I spoke to said that there was a good chance that they just ditched the vehicle somewhere after wiping it down for prints. If they had already planned such a detailed operation out, there was a good chance they planned for that too. The only saving grace was that the officer assured me that my report was a step towards catching them. A small step, but a step nonetheless. The horrifying experience I went through that morning wasn't for nothing, as not only did the cops now have a description of the guy who tried to do the kidnapping, but their failure to kidnap my daughter meant that they'd probably hesitate before trying the same plan again. I took a lot of comfort in that idea, and if it wasn't for the cop taking the time to reassure me of that, I don't think I'd have dealt with the trauma of it as half as well as I did in the months that followed. But I did a lot of praying too. Desperate prayers that whoever had planned such a horrifying kidnap would never, ever be successful, and that no one else would have to endure the pure horror that I had.
Let me take your hands. You must be tired.
This story happened to my brother, and it's told from his perspective. On Halloween of 2017, I went trick-or-treating with my friends who all called Harvey, Michael, and Daniel. We were all around 14 to 15 years old, and really just wanted to make the most of Halloween, as we had so much homework starting the 10th grade, and we probably would never be able to trick-or-treat again. Anyway, we were all walking down this random street at like 9:30, when we saw one house with insane over-the-top Halloween decorations that looked like it cost up to about $500. The four of us walked up to the house and rang the bell. Some 50-year-old looking man opened the door and said, "No need to yell. Just come on in and you'll get your sweets." Daniel told the guy, asked the guy, "Can you just bring the candy out here?" The guy didn't even answer. And so the four of us just walked away, not saying a single word. But of course, this story wouldn't be scary if it didn't end here. We were walking down my street when Harvey pointed out, "Guys, that man is following us." We all looked out behind us and saw the same 50-year-old looking man walking about 25 feet behind us. The four of us bolted all the way to the house. We ran to my house, we thrust open the front door, entered my house, and locked the door. The four of us were just hyperventilating as if we just ran an ultra marathon. I was starting to settle down when Jason said, "Look at the window." We all looked, and there he was, the old man looking through one of my windows. My parents were on a vacation, and my brother was at his friend's Halloween party, so we couldn't tell them. But what really made this horrifying was that I could see this guy holding a gun in his hand. I yelled at my friends, and we ran upstairs to call the police. The officers arrived in about 10 minutes. The man wasn't on my property anymore, but we remembered the house, so that's where we went. The cops went there, searched the whole place, and came out with the man in chains. It turned out the house was vacant, and the man was a serial killer who escaped from prison a month ago. If my friends and I are able to go trick-or-treating again, we're avoiding the street that this house was on. And who knows what that guy was really going to do if we went in. I'm glad this happened when we were teenagers and not when we were 9 years old. All I can say is if you're trick-or-treating, make sure that the house owner is completely normal.
It was the summer of 2014. I was 15 years old. I was staying at my friend George's house for the night. This was a common occurrence, and I used to stay over there sometimes more than 2 to 3 times a week during the summer. After all, he was my best friend, and we were kids, so it was completely normal. George and his parents had lots of property behind their house, probably like 7 to 8 acres, maybe more honestly. They had a huge barn, a cornfield, and some really cool trails in the woods we used to ride our dirt bikes and four-wheelers in. I felt like a bad friend for this, but I didn't even know it was his birthday when I got there. After people started showing up, and like more of his friends and family, I realized that he did tell me that today was his birthday a few weeks back. Oh man, I thought I didn't get him a present. I immediately apologized to him, and he took it very well. As a matter of fact, he told me he didn't want any birthday presents from his friends this year, and that he wasn't expecting anything because of how good his parents spoiled him this year. That made me feel better, but I still felt guilty. We did everything that you would normally do for a 15-year-old's birthday party. We had cake, opened presents, and us kids spent some time playing outside with his new airsoft guns that he got for his birthday. He already had quite the collection of them, so we all had our own that we could play with. I won't go too deep into this part, but we decided we wanted to do teams. It was me, George, and Will. The other team had Evan, Scott, John, and Kyle. They had more people, but we had better guns. The whole gist of the game was to shoot them before we get shot. So we were all running around the trails frantically, trying to get the other team down before they got us. After quite a few games, and skip forward 2 hours or so, it was around 6:30, so the sun was starting to set. George and I agreed we should all go back inside and play some video games before everyone had to leave. But everyone else wanted to keep playing with the airsoft guns outside. Even though it was George's birthday, he was nice enough to let everyone vote on what we should do. It was apparent that we were going to be playing outside longer according to the votes, so that's what we did. We restarted the game, and we all had about 2 minutes to get set up and hide where we wanted to. George yelled, 3, 2, 1, go. This time George and I were alone. We were pretty deep into the trails at this point, and he had me following him deeper into the woods. We ran all the way to this treehouse that was built a long time ago. We climbed up there immediately. Are you sure they will even come back this far? I asked George. I mean, it's getting dark, and I doubt they would even think that we would go this far. Yeah, they probably won't, he said, but if they do, they won't be able to get us before we get them. And plus, it will be funny if they can't find us. As time went on, it got darker. Hey, George, we should probably go home. Just a few more minutes, he said. After all, it was his birthday, so I wanted to do what he wanted. Shh, do you hear that? George whispered. There was someone, or something walking quite close to us. We thought it was them, but we heard our friends yelling and talking further out into the distance, so we immediately ruled them out. Unless they were splitting up and trying to trick us, I whispered. No. No offense to them, but none of them are smart enough to think of that, George said. Geez, harsh, I said. He looked at me and kind of shrugged, and then he put his finger up to his mouth and said, shh. Whatever was approaching us was getting closer. After a few moments of being quiet, we could finally see the tall, slender-looking shadow that stood before us. I don't think they can see us, I whispered. Shh, George said. Yeah, it definitely wasn't any one of our friends, because whatever it was the size of a fully grown man, and not a teenager. We stayed put, as quiet as possible. Thankfully it was dark, because from where the person was standing, it was evident they couldn't see us. The person started walking in the opposite direction now. The last bit of light that shined into the woods ever so lightly shined directly at the unknown person. They were wearing some sort of ghillie suit, it looked like. George took no chances and jumped down as soon as the strange figure was out of sight. What, are you crazy? I asked. He insisted I followed, so I did. I was scared, but I would have been more scared by myself, so that's why I went with him. We immediately ran a different way than the way we used to get there. He said he knew a better way back to the house, and that there was a way through the cornfield that was parallel to the trails we were in. Almost immediately after jumping out of the treehouse, though, the thing in what looked like a ghillie suit, who we assumed to be a weird man, heard us and started running towards us. We had a bit of distance between us and him, and it was a good thing we were way faster. Because I don't know what would have happened to us, or one of us, had us not have been faster. We ran screaming the whole way back. Our friends must have realized that we weren't joking, because they also started running towards us and made their way to us only a minute or two later. We all made it to my backyard, and my dad must have heard us because he ran out with no shoes on at all to our rescue. George and I told him everything. My dad immediately called the police, but there wasn't much they could do since they couldn't find the man, and since I couldn't give a description. The only thing I can really say is, I will never be going back out into those trails ever again, and I highly doubt George will either. This took place like 10 years ago. I was staying at Alex's house, who was my best friend at the time. It was just your average weekend of playing with Nerf guns, eating pizza, and drinking Mountain Dew, while playing Call of Duty and Halo on Xbox Live all night. You know, pretty much what every kid did back in 2012. This is more of a mysterious kind of story, and I'm certain that most of the people I've told either think it's made up or that I'm crazy. But my friends and I know it's true. Ever since this night, I've 100% believed that there is such thing as the paranormal, or whatever you want to call it. But you know what I'm talking about. Like ghosts, demons, maybe not that exactly, but something bad and extremely disturbing. Something that we as humans can't comprehend yet. So we were upstairs in Alex's room, just me, him, and Sebastian. We were just having fun taking turns playing Halo and Call of Duty, since there were 3 of us and he only had 2 controllers. All of a sudden, Alex muted the TV and got us all to be quiet. Immediately, we all heard what sounded like someone screaming at the top of their lungs, like I have never heard before. It was a very demented, wailing sound that Alex said he hears sometimes. Keep in mind, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, on a dead-end street that only had 1 street light post on it. With a very small amount of light that we had to work with, we saw this silhouette of a super tall being sprinting like a deer across the street. The wailing sound diminished slowly as it got further away from us. What the heck was that, Alex? It's a ghost, he said. What do you mean a ghost? Come on, you saw that too. Now if you can sit here and lie to yourself and say that was a human or some sort of animal species that isn't known to man yet, then go ahead. But clearly that thing was no animal, and it definitely was not a human being. I don't know what it is. My guess is as good as yours. By this time, the strange skinwalker-looking thing has completely vanished out of sight, and we couldn't hear anymore. Alex kept staring out the window, though. He looked like he was about to go insane. Alex, hey bud, you okay? You should probably sit down and drink some water. He then started to cry. I guess the emotions of all this got to him, and he couldn't control it, so he started having a breakdown. Apparently this has been happening to him for years now, and he doesn't know what to do, and that no one else has seen it besides us 3 that he knows of, and that his parents won't believe him and that they think he's crazy. I think he was happy that after all these years, someone else actually saw what he was talking about. Of course he didn't want us to see it, because it traumatized us as well, but I think it gave him some sort of comfort knowing that it was real and he's not crazy. But maybe even more discomfort though, because knowing that it's real is downright terrifying. Apparently he still hears it from time to time, but he has chosen to completely ignore it.
Every time I entered the room, I felt her gaze on me, like she was trying to communicate something. As the days passed, I began seeing her move, or at least I thought I did.
Growing up, I had to get used to my dad pranking me, which is why, when he called me to tell me not to answer the front door as I was watching TV, I thought he was just messing with me. My phone rang, and that was the first thing he said, "Don't answer the door." I froze for a moment, but then began to laugh because I assumed he was just trying to freak me out. But when the doorbell rang, it got increasingly more serious. My dad must have heard the bell on the other side, because he very firmly said, "Don't go to the door." I asked him what was going on, because I could tell how serious he was being, and he told me that he wasn't sure, but the police were on their way. I was both shaking with fear, but very curious as to what was going on. The doorbell rang again, and I figured I could peek out the window and see who was there. I leaned over my couch and slowly moved the curtain out of the way, and my dad must have heard me gasp because all he said was, "Hey, you're gonna be okay. The police will be there soon. Just don't answer the door." And I wish that made me feel better. But outside my house, there were at least 3 men, all dressed up in clown clothing and carrying what looked like weapons. I could see 2 of them standing on my porch, while another was walking around my yard. I told my dad that I was scared, and that was when the ringing of the doorbell turned to slamming on the door. I couldn't tell if they were knocking really hard or trying to kick it down. I began to panic, and as I turned away from the window that was facing the front of my house, I screamed. Standing on the other side of my house, with his face pressed against the window, was the 3rd clown. He waved his hand slowly as we made eye contact. The slamming at the front door grew louder and louder, and my dad tried to calm me down, though he knew there was little to be done until the police arrived. Thankfully, I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance. Sadly, so did the men trying to break in. The 3 of them quickly ran off my property and down the road away from the sirens. Once the police arrived, I unlocked the door and let them in. We explained everything to them, and they let us know that we weren't the only call that they had gotten like this in the past few months. Apparently, these 3 had been terrorizing people in the surrounding area for a few months before I had a run-in with them.
His face twisted in a mix of anger and madness.
During my sophomore year of college, I suddenly had to switch dorms due to housing and residence life at my university being completely awful to me and a few other student workers. Long story short, I lost my job and I actually had to move within a day. My parents came 5 states away and made a huge fuss in the housing office so that I was able to get more moving time. This is really important later in the story. I used to go on Instagram Live a lot because I'm a music minor, and practicing in front of an audience really helps me improve my piano skills. I guess Instagram had begun offering the feature of showing stories and lives on the Explore page, so I ended up getting a lot of views and comments from strangers. Nothing too bad. It was usually just song requests that I couldn't fulfill because I had a strict repertoire from my piano professor, or hard eyes from strangers. I used to really enjoy the lives until I got a comment from a man who knew exactly the location of my university. I never wore any kind of school attire during my lives or publicized my location on Instagram, so it made me a little nervous. I stopped doing lives after that for a while, getting caught up in regular work and figured everything was fine. The guy sent me a few messages offering to take me on a date. A quick scan of his profile made it clear that he was at least 50 years old. He worked as a laborer for the city my university is located near. He asked me several times a day what buildings my classes were in, if I liked the cafeteria, etc. Until I finally got scared and decided to block him. However, before I blocked him, I called him a pervert and a freaking weirdo for being so interested in me when I was so much younger than him, and for also trying to find me when I was trying to go to class. A few weeks later, after I'd forgotten about his weird messages, I got a message from him saying something along the lines of, "I waited for you in front of your old dorm for hours, but you never showed. Did you go home for the weekend? You shouldn't be so rude to me next time, or else we won't have fun whenever we meet face to face." That message scared me more than I'd ever been scared in my life. One of my really close friends graduated from the university and began working as a campus police officer around the same time that this all happened. So I decided to go see her and see what I could do. Sadly, not much could really be done about it, but I definitely pulled back on my social media presence. The guy had followed me from 2 more Instagram accounts with different usernames, and I blocked all of them before he could even message me. Thankfully, since leaving after that spring semester, I haven't heard from him since. So to the creepy old guy from Instagram that wouldn't leave me alone, I really hope I don't hear from you ever again.
Again in the supermarket parking lot one evening.
When I was in the 8th to 10th grade, I was extremely involved in this small building server. The average age was probably about 15 to 17, and I joined a group of builders and Skyped with them every weekend for like hours. We all became close fast, and we trusted each other, enough that we actually followed each other on Instagram. I became particularly close with one of the builders in my friend group named Peter. Peter was in the same grade as me, and we ended up texting quite a lot. I had heard some rumors that Peter might have a crush on me, which he denied, which I kind of found laughable because, I mean, it was the internet, and I just brushed it off. Everything was fine for a while, until something began to feel really off whenever I talked to him. I was starting to constantly catch him telling these small lies. This really bothered me, so I figured it was time to distance myself from him and just stop talking to him altogether. Cut to a few months later of no contact, and Peter out of the blue sends me a text that he's going to be possibly transferring to my high school. He said he was doing this so he can get in-state tuition for college. Peter's plan was to somehow live completely alone and support himself while in high school. My stomach dropped when I read that text, and I just felt really off. I try to be calm, but also tell him that his plan is crazy. I tell him that it's oddly convenient that he chose my random suburb of all places. Peter just insists that his plan will work out, and it's really just a coincidence that he's going to my high school. I'm trying to call Peter's bluff, hoping he's just screwing with me because I cut him off. Peter then says that he's already bought the plane tickets, and he's going to stay in my town to go visit some high schools in the area. Fear washes over me. I begin to realize that Peter definitely has some really weird unhealthy attachment to me. Peter wasn't bluffing. To my horror, he posts a picture on Snapchat at the airport. Peter asked me to meet him up while he's there, but of course I declined. Later on, I see on his Snapchat story that he's actually taking a tour of my high school. He takes lots of videos and pictures, and probably hoping I can see it. Luckily for me, I'm actually stuck home with pneumonia. I spent the next few days totally on edge and totally afraid that he was going to ring my doorbell at any moment. Luckily, he wasn't smart enough to find where I live, and he flies home and doesn't even follow his plan. The most baffling part? None of my old group on the Minecraft server even thought he was doing anything creepy. I honestly felt like I was going crazy for even thinking this was weird. I thought that my rejection for this meetup would be the end of it. But about 2 years later, I had just committed to my dream college. I still stupidly followed Peter on social media because I wanted some kind of warning if he was coming to my area again. Once again, Peter did. I see him posing right in front of the library at my college with the caption saying, "Transferring here is definitely the move." Cut to a few minutes later, and Peter finds out that I had a boyfriend now, and he directly contacts me for the first time in like 2 years. He starts asking me strange questions like, "Is he going to protect you?" I shouldn't have answered, but for some reason I did. I finally blocked him, and out of fear, I decided to stop following him on social media. He hasn't tried to contact me since.
But when I looked back to reverse, she was sitting in the back seat. I was horrified, quickly opened the door, and ran. I ran far, but every time I looked back, she was...
To Waffle House sometimes. It's fun, relaxing, and relatively cheap. However, tonight I decided to go out with a couple of girls I work with. I don't have a vagina myself, but since we all closed up together, we thought we would go grab something to eat. So while we're eating, I'm facing the door, and in walk these two drugged-out looking people, which isn't uncommon for Waffle House. But something about these two people in hoodies, in the middle of summer, in Texas, really put me on edge. The two girls I was with were both pretty attractive. The two guys also took note as they walked past. I've been in a couple of sticky situations and can always tell when shit is about to go down. And these guys gave off that vibe like no other. They sat behind me where I couldn't see them in any reflection. It was nerve-wracking. A few minutes went by before I realized that it was just our two groups in the restaurant. I glanced over my shoulder and saw they weren't eating anything, just drinking and staring at us. fuck. I told the two girls I was with that we should try to hurry up and go because I was tired, trying not to freak them out, because assholes like those guys feed on fear. We got up, and I look over at them. They were still watching us with empty drinks now. At this point, I should say two things. I have an injured knee right now from practice that causes me to limp a little, and I train in Muay Thai boxing and compete internationally in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I am not one to be fucked with, but the limp definitely gives off the impression that I would be easy to overpower. So as we were paying, I noticed one of the guys point at me and make a stabbing motion, and the other guy smiled, and they both stood up and walked towards us. One of the girls I was with was making sexual passes at me, which were very visual. I told her to stop as these guys got closer, and I saw one lick his lips as the other held one hand in his pocket. I told the hostess to keep the change and hurried the girls outside while trying to hide my limp as best I could. We got to the parking lot, and I told one girl to go to her car and gave the other the keys to my car and told them to hurry up and get in, since I couldn't run with my limp, and that I would explain later. The guys came out as I was getting in my car, and I saw one of them pulling something out of his pocket and heard him yell something I couldn't make out over the sound of us noping the fuck out of there. I texted the girl who I wasn't taking home and explained the situation and why I was acting weird. I hate to think about what could have happened if I had not been paying attention to my surroundings. Bad shit almost went down because of, I'm assuming, crackheads at Waffle House.
Over the last 7 months, I've been working for someone I to on Craigslist. Well, I'll just explain everything. This seems like an appropriate place to post this. I was scouring the internet for some sort of paying gig. I didn't really care what. Then I came across a post on Craigslist. I had refreshed the page and there it was. Someone was looking for a person to come by and feed their pets. I assumed they were going out of town or something, so I contacted them and left my number through email. I got a response immediately in the form of a phone call. The caller was a man who explained to me that he was moving out of town and his parents had cats they wanted fed daily. I gave the man my name so he could run me through a cursory background check, and in about 20 minutes I was hired. I went there the next morning to get all the instructions and whatnot, and met the man I spoken to on the phone. His name was Ben. Ben explained to me that he could no longer be able to care for his parents' cats, and that his parents needed to focus on themselves, so I was being brought in to take care of that. The money would be left on the kitchen table at the end of every week, $200 a week, just to feed some cats, I know, right? In addition to that, money for more cat food would be left for me as needed. Then he told me the first thing that I thought was strange. I was to come at exactly 10 a.m. every day and be gone by 10 a.m. and I was never under any circumstances to interact with his parents. He told me that when I'm in their home, they will be in their chairs in the living room watching television and that I was not to disturb them ever. He asked if any of that would be a problem, to which I assured him it wouldn't. He then showed me the area in which the cats eat. There were 4 cats and where the food was kept. Well, not rude in the least, he was very adamant that I not explore further in the house, to which I assured him it wouldn't be a problem. He ushered me outside and showed me where the spare key was in case the door was ever locked, but he told me that was very unlikely to happen, and with that he expressed his hope that I could be trusted one last time, shook my hand, and told me to be there at 10 a.m. every day starting tomorrow. If I was ever unable to make it, call and leave a message on their home phone, to which he gave me the number. I shook my head and was on my way. The next day came and I went inside at exactly 10 a.m. I walked into the house and immediately to my right were Ben's parents, sitting in recliners, facing away from me, watching some kind of game show. I announced my presence, which they ignored, and made my way to the kitchen. I fed the cats bowls and left. The exact same scenario played out countless times over the next few months. 10 a.m., unreturned hello, feed the cats, leave. On Fridays, I would pick up the small stack of $20 bills from the kitchen table. It was the easiest job I ever had. Then came the inevitable. One day, I was running late. I got to the house at 10:08. I entered and apologized to Ben's parents for being late, to which I once again got no response. They just kept sitting in their chairs watching their game show. I went to the kitchen and fed the cats. I looked at my phone, which read 10:11, and walked down the hall towards the front door. When I reached the living room, I jumped and gasped out of shock. Ben's parents were now standing in the dark behind their chairs, completely still, staring directly at me. I apologized for running late and got out of there. Though unnerved, I went back the next day on time, and everything was fine. A few more months went by of nothing strange, and then came the last day I was there. I got there at 10:03, but wasn't worried because I knew I could be out before 10:10. The problem came when I was in the kitchen and I heard someone whisper the words, "Help me." It startled me and I jumped, looking around for the source of the cry for help. I saw no one around, but I heard it again, and then a third time. I began looking around before realizing I was running behind. I looked at my phone and it was 10:10. My heart sank to my stomach when I looked down the hallway and saw Ben's parents for the first time in the light. They were grossly emaciated and pale, looking completely malnourished. They were essentially walking skeletons. I apologized for taking so long and said I'd be on my way, but they just stood there, blocking the way to the front door. I said I would take the back door, which was located in the kitchen, but when I went to open it, it required a key to open from the inside. Seriously, it was at this point that true panic set in. I looked behind me, and the parents were now about half a foot away from the entrance to the kitchen, and I had nowhere else to go except for what I presumed was a door to the pantry. They had blank stares across their faces, and their eyes looked as if the life had left them a long time ago. In a last-ditch effort, I went to the door that I thought was the pantry, and found it led to a staircase leading into a basement with, of course, no light. As soon as I opened the door, there was a horrid stench that washed over the otherwise clean air I was standing in. I carefully went down the stairs and looked for a window, but they were all nailed shut. I happened to look back up the stairs, and the parents were now standing next to each other at the top of the hallway. It was truly horrifying. I pulled out my phone and called 911, not knowing what else to do. And when I explained my situation, they said they would send a car out immediately, and to stay on the phone while they connected me to the unit en route. I ran into the dark basement using my phone as a light. It didn't provide too much illumination since I was in the middle of a call, but it was just enough. There were racks of junk that lined the basement, separating it into almost aisles. I went down to check if any of the windows were possibly loose, like I'd be that lucky. Then I turned the light around and shined the light in front of me, and I was inches away from the parents' lifeless-looking faces. I let out a scream and ran in the other direction, and tripped over something, sending my phone flying from my head. Of course, it landed face down so I couldn't find it. I ran back up the stairs and into the kitchen, looking back and seeing the parents standing at the bottom of the stairs with slight grins on their faces. I ran down the hall to the front door and flung it open, screaming when I saw the cop standing right in front of me. He asked me if I was the one that called as I pushed past him to get outside, and I told him I was. I looked in the window and saw the parents sitting in their chairs, watching their game show. I explained that these crazy old people had trapped me in their house and were chasing me around. The cop went in to talk to the parents and look around while I sat in the cop car. He came back out about 5 minutes later and asked if I was sure someone was chasing me. I said yes, I was absolutely sure that it was the two old people that lived there. He informed me that the people that live there, the people in the chairs, have been dead for quite some time. I asked what the smell in the basement was, and he said there was another body down there. Backup showed up. I gave them my statement and explained how I'd been coming there every day for months and months to feed the cats. I told them to call Ben, the homeowner's son. I gave them the number and it was disconnected.
You remind me of someone I used to know.
She said, her voice smooth, almost.
I used to work at a Starbucks here in Cardiff, and I've got to be honest, it's one of the better jobs I've ever had. The manager was brilliant, the other staff were nice and looked out for each other, so for a minimum-ish wage job, it was about as good as it gets. The only bad shifts to work were the first halves of Monday and Tuesday mornings, as the pre-work rush meant people were often at their absolute worst. I mean, don't get me wrong, people could be complete jerks at other times of the day or week, but the highest concentration of them was Monday and Tuesday mornings, without a shadow of a doubt. But rude customers aren't scary. Annoying and frustrating, yes. Chillingly cruel and calculating, not as much. Which is why this particular incident has stayed with me for so long, and I always seem to use it as my personal point of reference for how terrible human beings can be to each other. So, it's a Monday morning, and we're just coming to the end of the rush at around 9 a.m. 30 minutes more and the caffeine fiends will start to thin out and we can get some coffee and make a smoke break of our own. I heard her before I saw her. Like, she was only just trying to get a handle on what had been pure harpy screeches just moments before. Some woman was on her phone, ranting away and not looking where she was going as she tries to find the back of the queue. In doing so, she cuts off this other bloke who politely informs her that she's queue jumping. I don't know if she actually didn't hear him or was just tactically ignoring him, but either way, this bloke has to tap her on the shoulder before saying, "Excuse me, believe I was ahead of you." The woman just shrugs this off at first, giving the guy a gesture like, "I'm too busy to listen to you." I remember the look of anger on the guy's face as she gently but firmly grabs the strap of her handbag and tugs her out of the queue before taking her place. I'm a bit torn about the whole thing. Like, yeah, it was righteous, but laying hands on someone, I feel like there could have been a better way to resolve the issue. But it wasn't like the guy had picked her up and thrown her, and due to the size difference, that was definitely a possibility. Anyway, she reacts like this had been the case, like him actually standing up to her was some horrific incident of assault, and starts demanding someone call the police, even though she herself was on the phone and simply refused to hang up. A couple of staff members and customers managed to calm the situation down, and we get the guy his coffee before one of my colleagues serves the angry woman. I didn't serve her, but when she got her order, she turns to be like, excuse me, this coffee isn't as hot as I asked for."
I waited until Clara left
No,
the apartment one afternoon.
I know better than to just argue with customers, and especially absolute whoppers like her. So I do as I'm asked and heat the coffee up a little bit more for her. I hand it back. She dips a finger in it and once again tells me, "This coffee isn't hot enough." Now, bearing in mind, she just watched me run some steam through it, but again, I do as I'm asked and give her back some literally steaming hot coffee that she proceeds to absolutely overload with sugar. No wonder she was in such a stinking mood. Her entire life was probably one big sugar crash, hence why she was such an unbearable person to be around. But little did I realize, that coffee wasn't for her. And on her way out of the store, she took the lid off of her scalding hot syrupy coffee and threw it in the guy's face as he sat reading his newspaper. God. The sound of that guy screaming was absolutely horrific. Like I didn't actually see the woman throw her coffee in the guy's face, so I thought someone had broken a leg or something. That's the only time I've heard someone scream in pain like that. When my old skating buddy absolutely shattered his leg on this visit to a Bristol skate park one year. But what followed in the coffee shop was pure chaos. People were pouring bottles of water onto this guy's face, ambulance staff and police turning up. I think the woman legged it as soon as she threw the coffee because, to my knowledge, no one was arrested. But the guy who had the coffee thrown on him suffered life-changing injuries. From what another colleague told me, the gross amount of sugar in the coffee meant that some of it actually stuck to his face like a kind of molten hot glue. He'd been left with terrible scarring for the rest of his life, and all because he stood up to some absolute monster in the queue that morning. That's what I find really scary. That some people out there are so unhinged that a seemingly normal interaction with them could end up with you suffering injuries you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. Just one moment of misjudgment, one little enough is enough moment, and boom, you're going to look at a very different version of yourself in the mirror for the rest of your natural life.
The fact that I have some options. I have a beach house in Florida that I tend to visit with my girlfriend on the colder months up north. In the warmer months, we'd still visit occasionally, but nowhere near as much, since there wasn't as much of a need to. It was early February, freezing up in Connecticut, so my girlfriend and I took a trip down to Florida to visit the beach house. By the time we actually got to the house, after a day and a half's drive, it was starting to get dark out. It was actually a long month and a half since I'd been there the last time. The electricity and water and everything was already on since it was the winter, and I kept everything on during the winter season due to our frequent visits. So all we had to do when we arrived to the house was unpack, take a couple of lounge chairs, and walked 20 seconds onto the beach to take a nap. We didn't even check out any of the other rooms because we were so drained. We lounged down on the beach until it got really dark. I felt my girlfriend's hand on my shoulder. I looked up at her and she asked if I left that light on. I turned to the house and saw one of the upstairs lights on. Not just that, but at one of the windows in that room, there was a shadow outlined. I looked at my girlfriend and she looked at me, and I think it sunk into both of us that someone was in that room at that window. I told her to wait there, and I ran up to the house as fast as I could. When I got to the back doors, I started being really quiet. I slid it open and shut quietly. Being that I was barefoot, it made tiptoeing a bit easier. I made it to the stairway and then halfway up the stairs before I heard a door shut upstairs. I went up the remaining stairs a bit quicker now and saw that the door to the room that had the light on was open, but the lights were off now. I kept the lights off though. I just used the flashlight which I had in the shelf ledge upstairs. Then I noticed the closet door. It was shut. That must have been the door I heard closed. I figured I'd shut off the flashlight and tiptoe to the door of the closet, and I slowly put my ear up to it to listen. There was nothing but silence in the room and on the other side of the closet door. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I opened that door. If someone was in fact on the other side, I had to confront this. I grabbed the two little knobs and finally brought myself to yank the doors open. But it was empty in there, or at least from what I could tell, it was dark. I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on again, and yep, the closet was empty. But a creak in the floorboards outside of the room caught my attention. I ran into the hall expecting to see the intruder, but no, it was just my girlfriend. I got mad at her for coming into the house, even though I told her not to. But now that she was there, I told her to help search the upstairs. We looked around in all 3 bedrooms upstairs, all the closets, and the bathroom, but there was no one. Then we checked the downstairs. Every room, every closet, no one. We had to figure out who was in the house and how they managed to escape. So we locked all the doors and looked around the house for any signs of breaking and entering or stolen items. But there was neither of that. So we brushed up and went to bed since we were exhausted. However, that night, before we could fall asleep, there was a click under our bed. I asked my girlfriend if she could hear. She said yes. I got out from under the bed and got down onto my knees. When my face got to the ground level, giving me a view of the underside of the bed, I could see the intruder lying under our bed. I looked at him face to face before he crawled out and made a break for it.
I smiled confidently.
I couldn't catch him once he got outside because I was still barefoot.
Maybe my obsession.
I also didn't get a very good look at his face because we only looked at each other for about a few seconds. We once again searched the whole house to see what he could have stolen, but surprisingly, nothing was stolen.
Seemed like the perfect choice, ignoring the awful attitude of my co-workers here. Since childhood,
This story happened when I was a freshman in high school.
always trying to keep everything.
Back then, I used to ride to school every day on the bus and then take it home.
Today, I cleaned the store.
I would usually be home by myself for a few hours until my parents got home from work. One day I got dropped off the same as always and walked to my house.
Painfully sore.
I got to the front door and put the key in, only to realize that it was already unlocked.
White layer of skin.
I found this strange because it was usually always locked when I got home.
Looking at me with
We lived in a decently busy area, so we were always sure to lock our doors.
look again.
As a high school kid, I got a little concerned from seeing this, but I figured one of my parents just forgot to lock it. I went inside, and when I did, I got a slightly bad feeling. It was very quiet, and I slowly looked around the room. Everything looked normal and in place. I then thought I heard a noise of someone walking upstairs, but it was really hard to tell. It gave me a shiver down my spine, and I paused to listen more closely. When I did, I heard no more noises. The noises that I had heard were so brief and quiet that I figured I had to be just paranoid. I locked the doors and went into the kitchen. I made some pizza rolls, and then went up to my room, which was upstairs, and watched some YouTube videos in my bed. After a few minutes of doing that, I got really tired and fell asleep. I woke up about 30 minutes later. When I did, I went back to watching YouTube until I heard the sound of my parents getting home a short time later. I then went downstairs and helped them unpack groceries which they had gotten. I was talking to my mom when I heard my dad shout from upstairs.
Looking for this?
He came down and said that my parents' bedroom was all messed up as if someone had torn through it. We all went upstairs to find the room was a complete mess. It was then that I remembered everything and told my parents about the door being left unlocked. They told me when they got home that I had left the door unlocked as well, but I know I had locked it. The police were called and came over to search the house. Nobody was found, but my parents did have several valuables stolen. I realized that I most likely was home with the intruder in the house and had taken a nap with them, probably in the next room. It gave me the chills. I'm very lucky that I didn't decide to look into my parents' room.
Feeling as though I had come alive again. I realized then that bleach had become an irreplaceable part of my life.
When I was a kid, my parents used to go out of town for business all the time. I used to have to stay at my aunt's house when they were gone. But when I turned 13, my parents finally trusted me enough to stay home by myself. I was excited for this because I felt like I was being an adult living by myself for 3 days.
Jesus Christ, you should just
My parents went over everything I needed and told me to lock all the doors and windows. When my parents left, I mainly watched TV and played video games. It was a Friday night, so I stayed up pretty late, and at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I finally got sleepy and decided to go to bed.
I felt like a rat.
I went around the house making sure every window and door was locked, and then all the windows with blinds and shades I covered. Then I got ready for bed and turned out all the lights. I got in bed, closed my eyes, and tried to fall asleep.
Would I be humiliated like
I
this?
was laying there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes when I heard the sound of a car slowly driving down our street.
After a long day in jail,
We lived in a very quiet neighborhood, and we were at the end of the street, so we didn't get much traffic often.
savings to order a few barrels
I kept my eyes closed until I heard the car seemingly stop directly in front of our house.
filling it. The air
I
was
heard the engine idling, but didn't hear the sound of a door
looking
opening.
at the shimmering yellow-green liquid.
After about a minute of this,
I cried
I got
tears of
curious,
joy.
so I carefully
Bleach is the
raised my blinds and looked out.
I can change the
I
skin
could see
color.
there was a pickup truck parked right in front of our mailbox, just sitting there with
And
the
the
engine running.
sensation engulfed my
I didn't recognize the truck, and I stayed watching it for a little while. Finally, I saw the door open and a man get out.
I told myself that if I
He walked around the truck towards my yard.
I could have a new life.
Our yard was pretty big. In fact, it was about 5 acres, and most of it was just woods that went from the side of our house all the way to the back and beyond our property.
Before me was a tub
The man
filled with
paced around a little bit, halfway in the street and halfway in our driveway.
to step out.
He seemed to
As
be
soon as my
looking
feet
around,
touched the floor,
and then out of nowhere, he just walked into the side of my yard and into the
Looking in
woods.
the mirror, I saw my
I started
body
freaking out
blood,
inside. I
fluid,
wanted to
and
call my
melting
parents,
away.
but with it being nearly 3 o'clock in the
I
morning,
reached for
I
my
knew they
phone
would be
to call for
sleeping.
help.
I considered the police, but I also thought maybe the man had a logical
The ambulance
explanation.
arrived. I blacked out in pain.
I feared the man was going to try to break into our house or something. I got up and once again checked every door and window to make sure that it was locked. I then turned on every light in the house to make it look like there were people home. After that, I went back up to my room and locked the door. I peeked out of the window again. When I did, after just about 30 seconds, I heard noises coming from the woods. I was very careful to not let myself be seen from the window. I saw the man come out of the woods. He jogged towards his truck and got inside. Then the truck sped off rather fast. So fast in fact, I heard skid marks as it drove away.
To him,
I was left
I
with
was a
many
reflection
questions.
of his success.
It took me a long time to fall asleep, and the rest of the weekend I was on edge.
I was invisible.
I'm happy to say that the man never came back, but I still wonder to this day what he was doing.
That I brought for you on our wedding day? His voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding. I blinked, staring at my plate.
This happened about 10 years ago.
I replied. My voice
I was, I think, about 12 or 13
I
at
could
the
feel the
time.
eyes of everyone at the table.
One night on a Friday after I got home from
Curiosity
school,
mingling with
my parents told me they were going to dinner with
Rick's
some
jaw
friends.
tightened. His eyes
That meant I
narrowed
would be
into
home alone for the night. I was the only child and my parents would occasionally leave me alone.
I liked
I always enjoyed it because I felt cool and grown up to have the whole house to myself. I asked my parents if I could have my friend Ryan over, and he came over a little bit later. We played some basketball, and then my parents left. Me and Ryan played some video games for a few hours after that, and then he left to go home. I stayed in my room playing Madden on my PlayStation. About 20 minutes later, I thought I heard a noise coming from downstairs. It was now around 9 p.m., so I assumed it was my parents and I thought nothing of it. However, not too long after that, I got a call from my mom on the phone, and she told me that they wouldn't be home for about another hour. Still, I had forgotten about the noise at that point, and I kept playing video games. That is, until out of the corner of my eye, I was sure I saw somebody walk past my bedroom and down the hall. I had my bedroom door open only about a foot or two, but I was sure I had seen somebody walk by. I tried to convince myself that it was just our cat or something, but suddenly I got really creeped out, and I wasn't feeling safe in my bedroom anymore. I wanted to get out of the house, but I was afraid of what I had seen. I waited in silence to see if I could hear anything else, but there was no noise. Then I heard the floor creak at the end of the hall past my bedroom. My door didn't have a lock on it, and it was on the second floor, so I felt if I made a run for it, I would be able to safely get downstairs and outside. I just didn't know who or what was at the end of my hallway. I was too scared to make any noise or look down the hall. I just sat there in my chair, staring at the crack in my door to see if whoever was there would walk by again. After a couple of minutes, I finally got enough courage to walk over to the door. I did it as quietly as possible, and then stood next to the door and listened. I didn't hear anything, so I decided that on the count of 3, I would quickly walk out of my room and down the stairs as quietly as possible, and then go out of my house. I took a deep breath and quickly left my room. But as I did, I guess that my curiosity got the better of me, and I looked to the end of the hallway. I saw a dirty woman with really messy hair crouched down against the wall with her hands over her face. As soon as she saw me, she started to scream. I was more than freaked out, and I ran as fast as I could down the stairs and out the front door. As I did, I heard her screaming getting louder and louder. When I got outside, I immediately took out my phone and called my parents. They told me to call the police, so I did, and then I ran to Ryan's house, which was about 5 minutes away. My parents picked me up from Ryan's, and we all went back to my house where we saw multiple police cars with flashing lights as well as an ambulance. I had to talk to the police, and my parents did for a while too. I guess when Ryan left out the front door, he left it open, and a lady that was messed up on drugs walked right in. It was something I will never forget.
Therapy became another prison. Each session felt like another layer of control Rick was imposing on me. He attended every meeting, hovered over every conversation. He was suffocating me, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Then, it happened.
There are 2 types of people who work at McDonald's, or fast food places in general. There are ambitious, intelligent people who are trying to work hard to achieve a goal, in the hopes that one day they'll be able to quit for the sake of something better. And then there are the losers, those with no ambition who have given up and have no desire to achieve anything other than a weekly paycheck. I like to consider myself in the first category. As I was working hard to afford my apartment while taking classes at the local community college, I normally worked the later shifts at the drive-thru window, which is the one spot most employees hated working the most. We constantly have to deal with extremely impatient, oftentimes very rude people who are on their phones or have music blaring, and oftentimes don't realize that I wasn't the individual who took their order, so it's not my fault if it's wrong. In addition to that, you're pretty much constantly on your feet and exposed to the elements. No matter how cold, windy, or rainy it is, you have to keep leaning out into it, wishing that you were in a warm car about to drive away from this place. My point being is please try to be more kind and patient with the drive-thru people. Yeah, some are lazy, but most are trying their best. And even though you only see them for about half a minute, a kind remark or a warm smile might make their day. Anyways, now that I've gotten that off my chest, I work the late shift with 2 people who I believe qualify for the second category of employees. Connie was a high school dropout who was almost She never invested in what she was doing, and Harold was a deadbeat who often smelled like weed and only kept the job because otherwise his parents would throw him out of the house. He was 32 years old. So one night I was there after 11 p.m. by the drive-thru window on an extremely cold January night, flipping through the pages of my class notes and trying to keep warm by the fry machine. Connie was mopping while looking at her phone, and Harold was in the back probably getting baked in the walk-in cooler. That late at night, we rarely got customers, and if we did, they were almost always zonked-out college kids who used the drive-thru but never physically walked into the restaurant. I stood up and stretched my legs and told Connie that I was heading to the bathroom. It was around 11:30 at this point. I came back less than 5 minutes later, with Connie more or less in the same spot that she was before. I walked past her and turned the corner to return to the window, and froze dead in my tracks. There was a bald man in white face makeup and a black hoodie standing directly outside the window staring in. His eyes were wide, with a blank expression that read, "What kind of trouble can I create?" The figure made direct eye contact with me and smirked, and slammed his palm against the window. I had no idea what to do, and inside my head, the words, "clown, mime, psychopath, danger, and death," all exploded like fireworks. The window was already shut and locked to protect myself from the cold, but the doors were all unlocked, and this person could easily walk right in and grab any one of us if he wanted to. In my head, I kept referring to it as he, but honestly, I had no idea what the gender was. The outfit and makeup made the stranger look androgynous, and maybe that was the point. The figure slapped on the glass window again with its hand. Drawing out the word like a snake. Now, even if the figure wasn't dressed like that, I was under no obligation to open the window. It's unlawful to serve walk-ups at the drive-thru window, certainly for their safety, but also for ours. I shook my head and backed away. I called over my shoulder, "Lock the doors." The whole time, this figure didn't break eye contact with me, and to the best of my memory, I don't even remember it blinking. It drew back its lips in a sinister smile, and I shit you not, its gums were black. I don't mean I was too far away that I couldn't see clearly. I mean its gums were as black as licorice. "Oh, Ben." It hissed again, louder this time. Its other hand slammed against the window, and it licked its lips with its tongue. "Oh, Ben." That's when a third hand slammed itself into the window. A left hand, and it was just as pale and as skeletal as the other two. I lost my shit. "Holy shit, call the cops!" I screamed, and ran back into the office, which was the only room with a locking door.
I reassured myself that it must
I heard Connie scream, "What the fuck?" And she dropped her mop and flew across the room and made for the back with me. All the yelling attracted Harold, and I shoved past him into the office and told him to look at the security camera. Sure enough, the white-faced creeper looked to have 3 hands on the window and was tilting its head back and forth, perhaps trying to discover where I ran off to. We locked the office door and called the cops, explaining to the operator that there was at least 2 prowlers outside acting in a threatening manner towards us. I kind of expected it to be over after I called the cops. If it was a prank, they would run once they realized they scared me enough to call 911. But it didn't end there. We watched as the figure left the drive-thru window, circled the building, and made for the restaurant door. "Is there a second one? Look for a second one." I panicked while still on the phone with the operator. Connie was freaking out, and Harold was muttering something about not getting the police involved, likely because he was carrying weed. That's when the power went out. Everything. Cameras, lights, phone, the whole building went down. And barely 10 seconds after we all quieted down after shouting at each other in the dark, we heard footsteps in the dining room area.
Night she was murdered.
"Connie,
I couldn't bear it.
Did you lock the doors?" I whispered. She didn't reply. I think she had her hand pressed over her mouth. "Oh, Ben." We heard a voice call from outside the room in the dark. "Oh, Ben."
Right in front of the door.
The shout came at least 3 more times, circling from the kitchen to right off the hallway where we were hiding. I was convinced I was about to die. and every decision I had made in my life that brought me there was flashing before my eyes. We heard footsteps pass the office. After another few minutes, we heard the wail of police sirens outside, and at any moment, we expected to hear gunfire and the police shouting at someone to get on the ground, but we never did. We waited until the police identified themselves, and opened the door and ran out into the parking lot. Since the power was down, we couldn't show the cops the security footage, so we just told them what we saw. They swept the whole building and said it was clear. The owner of that particular franchise store showed up about an hour later, after Harold and Connie had left. I waited for the power to be restored, so an officer could escort me back inside to collect my belongings. The next day my manager called me and asked me to work the night shift. I asked him if the creep from last night had been caught. When he said, "There was no creep," I told him I quit and hung up the phone. This story is completely true. I have no idea what caused the power outage, which apparently erased all the security footage from the day. Without proof on video, my manager and the cops concluded that it was an elaborate prank, but that third hand still bothers me to this day, even more so than it's hungry in the human eyes. Sure, it could have been a prank, but I wish someone would just confirm that for me, so I can sleep again. Keep your windows locked at night, and if you hear someone tapping from behind the curtains, don't open them.
Grow cold without a shred of sympathy. I stood there indifferently, observing everything around me. Tonight, this alley, this weather, it was the perfect place to commit a crime.
I'm 20 years old and I live in Canada. This story took place during the 2016 clown craze in October, about 10 to 20 minutes before my Subway store was going to close. To make things a little easier to understand, I've got to give a brief explanation of the layout of our store. So there's the front door that customers walk through, which is completely made of glass. Then there's the windows to the left, if you're standing behind the counter facing the front. The bathroom is beside the swinging door that employees use to get to the sandwich unit. This all began while I was finishing doing dishes in the back room. I was the only person there because they rarely had more than one employee for the closing shift, unless of course it was for training purposes. Really, only one employee is needed, even though it might not be a smart decision. There hadn't been any customers for a while, and I really had to go to the bathroom, so I started making my way to the swinging door by the sandwich unit, when all of a sudden I heard the bell ding at the front door, indicating that a customer had entered. I was honestly a bit annoyed, because I'd been putting off going to the bathroom for a long time, and obviously I can't leave someone unattended in the front store. Before I even turned around to take the person's order, and I know it's going to sound odd, but I heard the generic sound of a clown's nose honking. It sent shivers and goosebumps through my entire body. As I hesitantly turned around to confirm what I had just heard, there was someone standing at the door with a bright orange afro and white face paint. Beyond that, they were dressed extremely casually, though in a plain green zip-up hoodie and black jeans, which almost made it creepier. They stared at me and smiled from ear to ear. Before I could even think of doing anything, they gave me a sinister little wave, before quickly running out of the store and around the left side window. I was frozen in place. I was wondering, was this really happening? Or better yet, why was this happening? I didn't know the clown craze reached my small town. I just stared at the window for what felt like 10 minutes. Once I came to, I ran to the front door and just locked it. There was no way I was letting anyone in, even if we weren't closed yet. But before I did, I poked my head around the corner to make sure that lunatic was gone for sure. Well, I didn't see anything. He was gone, I thought. I couldn't see him anywhere. The parking lot was empty save for my car. So I went back in the store and locked the doors, counting the seconds until the actual closing time was here. But not 10 minutes until closing. A couple of cops were knocking at the door. I was nervous, yet relieved to see them. I immediately unlocked the doors and let them inside. Apparently, they were there to just ask me a few questions. They wanted to know if I had seen someone dressed with an orange afro and white makeup. Yeah, I was excited to tell them that some creep was out there so that they could catch this guy. Well, they explained that someone called not too long ago, saying that they drove by and saw someone matching that description in the subway parking lot, kneeling behind a green sedan. They were holding a carving knife. My heart seemed to stop. That was my car. The psycho was waiting for me behind my car. If the cops had...
Why was Pity just lying there oblivious? I felt a wave of jealousy, anger even. This woman, standing so close to him, made my skin crawl. I whispered,